Chapter 212. Before Meng Yu could finish her words, her body suddenly stiffened, and then she jumped up. Then she flashed in front of Wu Yueling to protect her, staring nervously in the direction of the door. When Xiao Yunlong saw her reaction, he immediately stood up. Following her gaze, he looked at the closed door. He knew that Meng Yu must have felt something outside the door. What's wrong? Meng Yu did not answer him, but stared intently at the door. At this time they heard the sound of the door lock twisting, and the two immediately took a step back. He protected Wu Yueling tightly, and Wu Yueling seemed to be infected by the emotions of the two people. She immediately stuffed the dragonfly behind her back into her pocket. Clatter, the door was twisted open, and then slowly pushed open. A not very tall figure stood outside the door, and as the door opened, she stuck her head in. A pair of green eyes curiously looked at the two people inside. Huh, how come there are only two? The girl looked left and right. Strangely, there were clearly three people here. How come there are only two? When Xiao Yunlong and Meng Yu saw the very obvious dark circles under the eyes, they moved at the same time. Xiao Yunlong took a step forward, stretching out his hands. All the metal objects in the room disintegrated in an instant, and then turned into a metal net, blocking the entire door. And Meng Yu reacted very quickly, bent down, picked up Wu Pengling behind her, and jumped out of the window behind them. When Wu Yueling was picked up, she was instantly discovered by the strange girl zombie. She stared straight at the little girl in Meng Yu's arms, and saw them jump out of the window behind them. The girl zombie suddenly became anxious. She wanted to rush in, but with a bang, she hit the metal net made by Xiao Yunlong. She leaned against the metal net door, and somewhat dazedly stretched out her hand through the gap. She grabbed in the direction of Wu Yueling, but soon she took her hand back, and then blankly looked at the net door that blocked her. She shook it with both hands, but it didn't budge. Xiao Yunlong slowly retreated, nervously but a little curiously staring at the girl zombie at the door. The two big dark circles under the eyes could be seen at a glance, but when he saw the eyes, Xiao Yunlong faintly felt that they had encountered a very troublesome zombie. Moreover, the other party's aura was extremely powerful, almost half of his own. This was a very rare variant zombie. Half of its face was covered with strange brown scales, and its eyes were green. Furthermore, his pupils were vertical, like those of a snake. Its claws were different from normal zombies. No matter what, a normal zombie's claws were still human hands. Even if they grew sharp nails, they would still maintain their original appearance. However, the claws of the snake-eye zombie in front of him were like a pair of beast claws. It was no longer in human hands. The zombie girl shook twice and found that the metal net blocking the door wouldn't budge. She suddenly took a step back, raised her claws slightly, and slapped the metal net. Bam! A hole appeared in the sturdy metal net. Then she continued to raise her third claw and slap again, looking very anxious. From time to time, he would stare at the window that Meng Yu had jumped out of. After Meng Yu jumped out of the window, she directly jumped down from the 4th floor. Then when she turned her head, she saw Xiao Yunlong also jumping down from above. Quickly take Lingling away, I will deal with it. As soon as Xiao Yunlong came down, he looked back at the window on the 4th floor that they had just jumped out of, and then raised his hand. The metal on the surrounding windows all fell off, and then gathered on the window that they had just jumped out of and sealed it. Meng Yu didn't talk nonsense with him, carried Wu Yueling and circled around, running to the front yard. She wanted to quickly run to the car they had parked over there and drive away. She wouldn't be able to run far if she relied on her feet. Carrying Wu Yueling all the way to the car, she heard a loud crash coming from the back of the building. Meng Yu looked back upstairs and found that the soldiers guarding outside were gone. They should have been killed by the strange zombie just now. She just took a quick glance, and then opened the door without stopping. She put Wu Yueling on the passenger seat, and then quickly went from the front of the car to the driver's seat. Starting the car and stepping on the accelerator, the car neatly reversed out and made a turn. Then she drove out. At this time, Xiao Yunlong suddenly jumped out from the side. He directly stood on the roof of the car. The two of them had a lot of experience, and could still recognize that this zombie was estimated to be a level 6 zombie. Therefore, they knew that their strength was not the opponent of this level 6 zombie. Now the most important thing for them was to protect little Yueling. And just now when the two sides faced each other, Xiao Yunlong and Meng Yu could perceive that the interest of this zombie was on little Yueling. It seemed to not care much about the two adults. Meng Yu drove the car not far away. Behind them was the building they had stayed in before. A figure suddenly flashed to the top of the building, and then directly jumped down from the top. Xiao Yunlong knelt on the roof of the car, patting Meng Yu's position with his hand. Slightly bending down, he said to her, "Speed up. It's catching up." Meng Yu fastened Wu Yueling's seat belt with one hand, while looking at the rearview mirror. Then she immediately stepped on the accelerator and began to accelerate. Really bad luck. How could there be such a thing here? Was this the one that Wu Chengyue went to find? But he didn't see this one using the lightning ability, right? Bang bang bang. There were still a lot of abandoned cars on the road, and Meng Yu's driving route was not very smooth. But her driving skills were not too bad, so she could barely make it. But the girl zombie wearing a school uniform was much more relaxed than them. She just jumped on the roof of the car, or stepped on the roadside lampposts, green trees, and directly caught up without any hindrance. But fortunately, these large number of cars blocking the road were made of steel, which was convenient for Xiao Yunlong's ability. He turned his back to the front of the car, and stretched out his hands towards the zombies that were quickly catching up. Whether it was the cars in front or behind, they all vibrated and floated up, and then moved towards the level 6 zombie in front of him. Xiao Yunlong swung his hands, and saw more than a dozen small cars were thrown out by him. He smashed the zombie girl that was chasing after him. And because the cars in front of Meng Yu were being lifted by Xiao Yunlong using his ability, the speed of her car had increased by 2 or 3 times. The girl zombie looked at the cars that were smashing towards her, and easily avoided them. Then she jumped towards the higher position of the lamppost or telephone pole. A more than 1 meter long tail was swinging behind her. Chapter 213. Xiao Yunlong then discovered that there was a tail behind it. Not only did he feel it was very fresh. How could there be a zombie with a tail? This thing's mutation direction was a bit strange. But soon he didn't have time to think about this problem, because the other side soon caught up again. Xiao Yunlong stared at it closely. His forehead was covered with a layer of fine sweat. The cars on the road were thrown off one by the zombies chasing after him. Bang 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 bang. Boom! However, at this moment, the figure of the female zombie behind them suddenly disappeared. Huh! Xiao Yunlong immediately raised his vigilance and looked around. Disappeared. Where did it go? Meng Yu, who was driving, heard the movement behind her suddenly quieted down. She suspiciously glanced at the rearview mirror. She found that the zombies behind them had disappeared. Seeing that there were still a lot of cars on the road, she shouted, "Xiao Yunlong, clear the way." Xiao Yunlong did not turn back. He stretched out his hand behind him. The abandoned car in the middle of the road in front of their car was immediately pushed to the side. The car had already driven several kilometers out of the neighborhood, and there were abandoned cars on the road. There were also a lot of ordinary zombies around, attracted by their movements. Xiao Yunlong stared at the top of the car for a while, but still did not see the figure of the zombie. He certainly did not think that the other side would retreat. It must be thinking of some way to sneak attack. Just as he was thinking at this time, suddenly a figure instantly rushed out from a small alley in front of their car, and then very accurately and steadily stopped in front of their car that was still moving forward. He used both hands to block the car that was coming over, and then pushed hard. Meng Yu did not clearly see how a person suddenly rushed out, and before she could react and step on the brakes, the other side had already used both hands to block the car. If it was an ordinary person, they would have been knocked more than 10 meters away at this speed of 120 kilometers per hour. But the problem was that the person who suddenly rushed in front of their car was not a human. Bang! So before Meng Yu could react, she felt a burst of dizziness. When Xiao Yunlong discovered it, he had already been thrown out along with the car. But he reacted quickly, flipped in midair, and by the time he landed on the ground, he was already fine. However, a loud noise caused his expression to change drastically. Bang! The car had already landed on the ground at the side, making a loud sound. Meng Yu! Lingling! Xiao Yunlong shouted in horror. He stood up in a panic and rushed to the car. Lingling! Meng Yu! Meng Yu! He rushed to the side of the car that had turned over a few times, leaned against the window and shouted inside. The car had already turned upside down with all four wheels facing the sky. The person inside was also in a head-down position. Mengyu was in the driver's seat, and there were many injuries on her body. His head was bleeding, and he was frowning with his eyes closed. As if hearing Xiao Yunlong's call, she had a slight reaction. Mengyu, how are you? Mengyu. Lingling. Lingling. Where's Lingling? When Xiao Yunlong leaned against the window and looked inside, he was startled by the bloody appearance of Mengyu. But soon he found that the co-pilot seat was empty, and Wu Yueling's figure had disappeared. Xiao Yunlong, covered in cold sweat, got Mengyu out of the car, thinking that she had just fainted. The injuries on her body were not a big deal. But to his despair, Wu Yueling had disappeared. The level 6 zombie was also gone. No need to think anymore, Wu Yueling must have been taken away by the level 6 zombie. What to do? Where was he going to find the level 6 zombie now? And Mengyu was also injured now. He could not leave her side. But Lingling had been taken away by the level 6 zombie. That was the zombie king. Advanced zombies love to eat the hearts of children and women. Wu Yueling was taken away like this. There was certainly no way for her to survive. How would he explain it to Wu Changyue? And even if he caught up and found the zombie king, what way could he have to take Lingling back from the other party? What's more, he didn't even know which direction the other party had disappeared to. How could he get her back? It seemed that he had to let Mengyu wake up quickly, and let her sense the direction and position of Wu Yueling. Xiao Yunlong's expression was somewhat sluggish as he picked up Mengyu and walked to the clean space next to him. Boom! The overturned car immediately exploded a few meters after he left. A red flame burst out, and then a plume of smoke rose. On the other side, a figure holding a child was quickly flying in the direction of West Lake. But not far away, the figure stopped on the roof of a building. The girl zombie carefully put the child on the ground and let the unconscious child sit against the wall. She actually didn't remember. She didn't remember anything. But she still knew that she couldn't eat people. Ever since she became like this, she had been very straightforward. She also didn't like to stay in one place for too long. She liked to run around. She knew very little. She didn't know what a zombie was, but she knew what a person was. She also knew that her appearance was no longer a person. Who was she? She also didn't remember. She liked to smell the living because it was very fragrant. It made her want to take a bite so that she wouldn't feel so hungry after eating. But she also knew that she couldn't eat people. Although she didn't know why she couldn't eat, there was a voice in her heart telling her not to eat. She didn't like to be alone. She wanted to find a playmate. But when those people saw her, they didn't desperately attack her. They were afraid of her and ran away when they saw her. Moreover, there were strange people who were still alive even though they were clearly dead. They were different from living people. They smelled bad and they looked very ugly. Their bodies were very dirty. She didn't like to go near them. Their hands and feet were clearly broken, but they could still walk. Their stomachs were clearly dug out, but they could still walk. She didn't like them. She instinctively didn't like them. That was why she wandered around alone. In fact, she liked to go around the human base and secretly observe them. She really wanted to go in and be with them. But she also knew that those people were afraid of her. Why? Why should they be afraid of her? She had never harmed anyone? The girl zombie squatted in front of Wu Yueling, her hands wrapped around her knees that were bent to her chest. She looked blankly at Wu Yueling's little face. This was a child so small. So cute. She had been wandering outside for so long. It was the first time she saw such a small child coming out. The girl zombie looked at Wu Yueling, then curiously stretched out her claws to touch her face. But before her claws touched Wu Yueling's face, she suddenly stopped. Looking at her sharp claws, she silently retracted them. She knew that her claws might be poisonous. Chapter 214. She often saw the living being bitten or scratched by those who were neither dead nor alive. They would all die, and then they would also become like them. He wandered around like a zombie. The girl zombie didn't know if she would turn others into zombies, but she felt that her current situation was similar to those walking corpses. Now she had a companion. This child would follow her from now on. She would raise her well. The girl zombie didn't think about whether the child's family would be worried, nor did she think about what the child would eat after following her. because she felt that the child could eat whatever she ate. She was now full of joy, because she didn't have to run around alone in the future. She could only quietly hide in a place where others couldn't see, and curiously look at those people. He didn't have to count the passing ants when he didn't have anything to do. When the girl zombie was looking at Wu Yueling, her expression suddenly changed. She looked up at the sky, then lowered her head and carefully picked up Wu Yueling, turned around and left. It seemed like it was going to rain. She knew that once it rained it would be very cold. The girl zombie carried Wu Yueling and went towards the West Lake District. The West Lake District was her temporary territory. She hoped that the big guy in the upper city wouldn't run over there and cause trouble when she was not there. But she still didn't know that the West Lake she was going to was where the child's father was. On the other side, Lin Xiao threw the level 6 zombie core into the lake. She saw a vine suddenly shrink back from the side of the lake. She smiled. She was really impatient. She sensed the energy of the zombie core and quietly came out. However, she was the only one who saw the vine crawling to the edge of the lake. No one else had noticed it. After the zombie core fell into the lake, Lin Xiao waited for a few minutes. Then she gradually felt the change of the energy in the lake. Although the fluctuations at the bottom of the lake hadn't appeared on the surface, Lin Xiao could feel the energy at the bottom of the lake was rolling. Because there were two kinds of energy that were merging, Lin Xiao could also clearly feel that one of them was the energy in the lake that she was familiar with. The energy that was originally very gentle, but now it wasn't so gentle. The other energy was the violent energy of the Zombie King. Maybe because it encountered the violent energy of the Zombie King, Little Man's energy also became very violent. Two waves of energy rolled at the bottom of the lake. Of course, one side was devouring while the other side was resisting. Lin Xiao wasn't the only one who could sense the surging energy at the bottom of the lake. In fact, there were others who could feel it as well. However, their senses were not as clear as Lin Xiao's. Lu Tianyi walked to the side of the lake with a puzzled look on his face. Standing beside her, he asked uncertainly, "Is there something in this lake of yours?" Lin Xiao looked back at him and then at Kong Qingming, who was walking over with him. These two brats were quite sharp. They had clearly only recovered 30 to 40% of their abilities. Xiedong also walked over quietly and looked at the lake. The dangerous feeling coming from the bottom of the lake was getting stronger and stronger. Lin Xiao only glanced at Lu Tianyi and the other man and did not nod at them. Instead, he handed the writing board to Xiedong and said, "Oh." She pointed to their clothes and then to the bucket. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming looked at each other and immediately understood what she meant. In the blink of an eye, Lin Xiao closed his eyes and his figure immediately disappeared from the lakeside. At this time, Lu Tianyi asked Xiedong, "I have a question." Xiedong looked at him in confusion. Lu Tianyi chuckled strangely and said, "Oh, Lu Tianyu's hair. Did she lose it all?" Kong Qingming suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Lu Tianyi glanced at him and then looked at Xiedong. They had all noticed this suspicious place before, but they saw that Lin Xiao had been wearing a hat and glasses. They felt that if they asked her it would probably be very awkward. But they were really curious. They imagined what Lin Xiao would look like when she was bald. Her face was still the same. One moment it was the heavy makeup she used to wear, the next moment it was her bare face, and the next moment it was her zombie eyes. Then Lu Tianyi felt like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know what kind of expression that woman, who had always loved beauty like crazy, would have when she found out that her hair had fallen out. She probably had a lot of things in her heart, ha ha ha. Xiedong looked at the two of them silently for a while. After 7 or 8 seconds he nodded. However, he also looked at Lu Tianyi with some surprise. He found that this man seemed to care a lot about Lin Xiao. No, it was actually Lu Tianyi who he cared a lot about. He didn't know that the current Lu Tianyi was no longer the person he used to be. Could it be that this good-looking man actually had a crush on the former Lu Tianyi? There was actually someone who had a crush on that woman? That was really strange. He wrote on the writing board, "You care a lot about her?" Lu Tianyi was stunned, and then his eyes darkened slightly. He smiled helplessly and said, "You can tell?" Xiedong rolled his eyes speechlessly. Kong Qingming also made the same expression as Xiedong, and then said, "It's not that I want to say, but your attention has always been on her, okay? After getting along with her for the past few days, don't you think she has changed a lot?" To be honest, I'm a little doubtful if I've recognized the wrong person. Lu Tianyi was slightly stunned, and then he stared straight at the lake. Of course, how could he not feel it? From the first time they met, he had felt that there was something wrong with her. He had long felt that he might have recognized the wrong person. But the problem was that she had admitted it herself, hadn't she? She didn't deny that she was Lu Tianyi. I know, but she didn't deny it. Kong Qingming was also silent for a while before saying, no matter what. With her current appearance, I guess other than the two of us, no one else would be able to recognize her. As he spoke, he looked back at the others. Xiedong glanced at them and didn't join in their conversation. Instead, he walked to the place where a pile of daily necessities was placed. He found a few buckets and came out. Because of the lake water, Lin Xiao had collected many buckets of different sizes and put them in case they needed them later. For example, when Lin Xiao separated from Lin Feng and the others at the hotel, she filled all the buckets in the hotel with water and gave them to them. 20 or 30 buckets of lake water of various sizes were left for them to use during this period of time. After Lin Xiao went out, she calmly glanced at Wu Chengyue, who was sitting on the tree next to her and didn't notice anything. Then she raised a smug smile. She turned around and left. Although it was a little unkind to steal his corpse core, she still had a grudge against him for being struck by him for no reason last time. She hadn't forgotten. Although she took Xiao Budian away, didn't she return it to him in the end? She even became a nanny and took care of his child for so many days. The corpse core this time was the reward for taking care of his child for so many days. Chapter 215. And Wu Chengyue knew nothing about Lin Xiao's departure. He was still waiting in the same place. After Lin Xiao left, she just found a building to climb up and looked at the sky. She suddenly found that the humidity in the air had become heavier, and the dark clouds above her head were getting lower and lower. It looked like it was going to rain. Since she woke up in this apocalypse, it looked like it was going to rain for the first time. But from Lu Tianyu's memory, it would be very cold when it rained. The temperature would also drop very low. But this had nothing to do with her. She was only afraid of the heat now. She wasn't afraid of the cold anymore. Just as she was about to jump down from the building and continue to look for the location of the planning bureau, suddenly, she paused and looked around in confusion. Then she closed her eyes and raised her whole body's perception to the maximum. A strange feeling made her a little confused. This feeling was not the kind that Lu Tianyi gave her, but the kind of feeling that Xiedong gave her last time. To be honest, she still hadn't figured out what was going on with the strange connection between her and Xiedong. If Lu Tianyi had some kind of strange connection with Lu Tianyu's blood, then she didn't seem to have such a connection with Xiedong, right? They were not relatives or anything. She closed her eyes and carefully sensed that strange feeling. Suddenly, she faintly sensed a strong aura. The aura of a zombie. Lin Xiao opened her eyes and couldn't help but curse in her heart with a depressed face. Fuck? Where did so many zombie kings come from? Who said that it was difficult to see zombie kings now? Who was it? Come out. She had only woken up from the apocalypse for a little more than a month, not even 2 months, and she had already encountered 2. Now the third one had come out. She subconsciously wanted to turn around and avoid that direction, but that strange feeling also came from there. It still made her very concerned. Last time it was Xiedong, then who was this time? And it was with a level 6 zombie. This zombie was very strange, she didn't know it. So, why would that person be with a level 6 zombie? Lin Xiao felt that not every level 6 king was as kind as Cho Lily. If it was like that thunder type, it would be more common sense. So, now that this person was together with a level 6 zombie, could it be that he was caught and used as food? Lin Xiao stood on the roof and frowned. He sighed in his heart. If she hadn't met him, she could have ignored him. But now she found out. If he didn't figure out what was going on, he would always feel that something was wrong in his heart. After thinking for a moment, Lin Xiao's figure flashed. He jumped down from the rooftop and chased after the zombie king that was coming over. Since she could turn invisible, it didn't matter if she went to take a look. If he still had the time to save them, he would do so. There wasn't enough time. At the very least, he had to see what was going on. Who was that person? What's with that strange connection between us? With that thought in mind, Lin Xiao became faster and faster. The sky was covered by dark clouds. This time it wasn't the dark clouds created by the Zombie King. It was a real dark cloud in the sky. The wind on the ground was getting stronger and stronger, making whistling sounds. Lin Xiao couldn't feel the drop in temperature, but Wu Chengwei could. He opened his eyes and looked at the weather. Although his body was protected by the energy of his special ability, he didn't want to experience the feeling of being drenched like a chicken. Since it was going to rain, he couldn't stay in the forest in the park. He stood up from the branch and jumped down. Then he turned and walked toward the nearby buildings. On the other side, Xiao Yunlong was guarding Meng Yu's side. He kept walking back and forth, like a big brown bear that was trapped. He wanted to quickly find Wu Yueling, but he had no direction. He was afraid that he would go to the wrong place and be further away from the level 6 zombie that took Lingling. Even if he found the level 6 zombie and Wu Yueling now, he couldn't take Wu Yueling back from its hands. But he at least had to know her whereabouts. Even if Xiao Lingling's heart was dug out and eaten, then he had to bring Xiao Lingling's body back. Wu Chengwei was too far away from them. There was no way to inform him of this matter. What should he do? He really didn't know what to do. Moreover, Meng Yu was now injured and unconscious. The longer she was unconscious, the further away Wu Yueling was from them. Xiao Yunlong's eyes were red, and he once again grabbed his hair. And when Lin Xiao sped up to approach the level 6 zombie, when she was only a few miles away from the other party, Lin Xiao suddenly stopped on top of a signal tower. She raised her nose and sniffed, her eyes revealing a look of bewilderment. This smell isn't Xiao Budian. Once she confirmed that the smell she was smelling now was Xiao Budian, who she had been separated from for more than 20 days. Lin Xiao couldn't help but be angry. That man, he actually brought the child to such a dangerous place. She didn't think much, immediately kicked her legs and shot out from the signal tower. She rushed toward the direction of the level 6 zombie at a faster speed than before. She must make it in time. Lin Xiao was rushing towards a street a few miles away. In a hotel building that was dozens of stories high, the zombies in this building had disappeared without a trace. Because there was a powerful level 6 zombie on the top floor, ordinary zombies would not dare to stay here. In a large suite on the top floor, there was a female zombie with a large scale on her face. She put Wu Yueling on the bed. The bed was very big. There were quilts and pillows, but there was a thick layer of dust. It seemed that there was no one living here when the end of the world came. Wu Yueling was put under the quilt. The female zombie did not clean up the bed. Instead, she directly stuffed Wu Yueling in. She squatted by the bed, both hands on the bed pressing the quilt, holding her cheek and looking at the few wounds on Wu Yueling's small face. The blood that flowed out had already coagulated. The female zombie looked at Wu Yueling while using her nose to smell her. So fragrant, so comfortable. Looking at her, she suddenly stretched out a hand. Bending her fingertips, she used her knuckles to rub the blood on Wu Yueling's wounds. Then she retracted her hand and looked at the sticky blood in a daze. It was really fragrant and sweet. At this time, the female zombie seemed to have gotten some delicious candy. She cherished looking at Wu Yueling. The feeling of wanting to eat but not willing to eat. When Lin Xiao came here, she looked in from the window of this large suite. She saw a little girl wearing a clean high school uniform, squatting on the bed. She seemed to be very happy looking at Wu Yueling on the bed. And Wu Yueling was lying there in a coma, but her breath of life was still very strong. It seemed that she did not suffer any serious injuries. Lin Xiao also discovered that this school uniform girl zombie had a tail that was slightly swaying behind her. Fuck, what kind of zombie is this? Just as Lin Xiao was feeling curious, the zombie girl suddenly sensed something and looked at the window she was at. Lin Xiao saw that the side of the face that she saw just now was good, but the other side was full of scales. Chapter 216. The girl zombie looked over with a pair of big black eyes, and looked at it with some doubt, but she didn't see anything outside the window, so she turned her face back. She continued to lie there and looked at Wu Yueling. Lin Xiao gently jumped in from the window. Fortunately, the window wasn't closed. Green eyes, what kind of ability did this zombie have? Lin Xiao was curiously sizing up this strange zombie. This zombie gave her a strange feeling. It had a strong aura, but it wasn't bad. It was good that it had a strong aura. but it didn't seem to have the sense of attack that a normal zombie would have. The strong aura gave her a very natural and peaceful feeling. The most important thing was that this zombie didn't have a trace of blood smell. There was no murderous aura, hostility, fierceness, and other aura that high-level zombies would have. And the way she looked at Wu Yueling was a bit strange. Was this the way she looked at her toy? It was like she just got a fun toy, and it was a very fresh look. What was this situation? Why did it feel like she didn't want to eat Wu Yueling? Lin Xiao quietly moved to Wu Yueling's side and found that Wu Yueling was still very cute. However, there were still a few fresh scars on his face. How did he get them? The blood seemed to have just solidified. It seemed that the injury wasn't very long ago. At this time, the girl zombie turned her head to look around the room, and her face was full of doubt. She still stood up and then looked left and right. She didn't know why, but she always felt that there seemed to be something in the room. Lin Xiao looked at her unexpectedly. This zombie's perception was really sharp. He was in a state of invisibility, but she was still able to detect him. But Lin Xiao quickly ignored her and stretched out her hand to press Wu Yueling's forehead. Her mind flashed. Go in. Then she and Wu Yueling entered the space together. After Lin Xiao disappeared with Wu Yueling's eyes lit up. The girl zombie suddenly turned her head and saw that Wu Yueling suddenly disappeared into thin air. It wasn't that her eyes were playing tricks on her, she really disappeared. Even the smell that smelled very comfortable disappeared together with her. Ow! The girl zombie opened her pair of green eyes, and her vertical pupils shrank into a thin vertical line. She looked at the empty bed with a dumbfounded expression. After Lin Xiao appeared in the space, he hurriedly hugged Xiao Budian, who had fallen in. After catching Xiao Budian, she immediately closed her eyes to observe the reaction of the female zombie outside the space. However, he saw her standing there with a dumbfounded expression, staring blankly in the direction where Wu Yueling had just laid on the bed. Then she slowly walked over and reached out to touch the pillow that Wu Yueling had been lying on. Oh, suddenly, this fellow's mouth flattened, and he scrunched up his face and started crying. The voice was very strange, but the sadness was very strong. Lin Xiao was speechless. What was going on? Before Lin Xiao could react, the zombie girl suddenly turned around and sat on the bed. Then, he began to kick his legs and clap his hands as he cried. Wah 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 wah, Xiao Lin. What's with the childish reaction of someone whose toy was stolen? But this zombie girl's reaction made Lin Xiao think of Cho Lily. She felt speechless. Why did this zombie's personality resemble Cho Lily? These two couldn't be sisters, right? And they looked to be about the same age. No way. Could it be that she had encountered a second Cho Lily? Lin Xiao looked down at Xiao Budian in her arms, and thought with some surprise. Then she thought of putting Xiao Budian on the bed first, and then get some lake water for her to drink. But when she turned around, she saw a group of naked men huddled together. They all looked at her with indescribable expressions. Lin Xiao. Actually, they weren't all naked, at least they were still wearing a pair of briefs. Big sister. Didn't you say you wouldn't come in for now? Lu Jing covered his chest with one hand and the other in front of him. He squeezed his legs and stared at her awkwardly. Xiadong, who was next to him, accidentally laughed out loud. He quickly covered his mouth with his hand. Lin Xiao glanced at him speechlessly, and then calmly walked towards the direction of the bed. Huang Shou stretched out his leg and kicked Lu Jing and said speechlessly, "Are you a girl? Why are you posing like this?" The others didn't have such a big reaction, but they looked at Lin Xiao with a strange gaze. Lu Tianyi stared at Xiao Budian in Lin Xiao's arms and nudged Kong Qingming with his elbow. He said softly, "Did I see wrong? Is that the little princess?" Kong Qingming also widened his eyes, and his gaze followed Lin Xiao all the way to the bed. He nodded and said, "You're not wrong, I'm not blind." Then the two of them looked at each other at the same time. So what was going on? I just want to ask, who is she hugging? Where did the child come from? Huang Shou moved closer to Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming. Lu Tianyi said, "If the two of us are not wrong, that is our base's little princess Lingling." Then, Huang Shou suddenly widened his eyes and looked at the two of them in surprise. He said suspiciously, "What? Little Princess Lingling? Why is the little princess here? Also, why did Big Sister bring her in?" Leader Wu and Deputy Leader Xiao must be anxious to death. Lu Tianyi frowned and shook his head, indicating that he also knew what was going on. Seeing that Lin Xiao had gone far away, the others were not as restrained as before. They continued to rub their wet clothes on their bodies, but their eyes still swept over Lin Xiao from afar. After Lin Xiao put little Yueling on the bed, she immediately found a cup and walked to the lake to fill a cup of water. Then she quickly walked back to the bed and gently lifted Wu Yueling's head. She fed her water. Wu Yueling also seemed to be thirsty, and she felt water pouring into her mouth. Unconsciously, she swallowed it down. The energy in the lake was now more than 10 times different from when Tiny Tot first came in. After Tiny Tot drank it, his body quickly absorbed the energy. Lin Xiao also found that there was still a hidden energy in Tiny Tot's body. When she drank the lake water, the energy in her body was also stimulated. She also found that the hidden energy was healing Tiny Tot's wounds and body little by little. After the lake water entered her stomach, the speed of the hidden energy's healing had increased several times. Lin Xiao raised her hand and touched a small cut on Tiny Tot's forehead. She found that in just a few seconds the scar had hardened. She gently scratched it, and it unexpectedly came off. She used her fingertips to gently touch the scar after the hard scar was removed, and there was no scar left. Only the surface of the skin was still a thin layer of light pink skin, and it was still very sensitive. Lin Xiao retracted her hand and placed the cup on the cabinet next to her. She walked back to the bed and sat down. She closed her eyes and continued to sense the reaction of the zombie outside. Chapter 217. The zombie girl outside was no longer crying. She just crossed her legs in front of her chest and hugged herself. She buried her face in her knees and looked very sad. Lin Xiao felt strange. She opened her eyes and looked at Xiao Budian. She found that there were no other injuries on Xiao Budian's body except for the slight injuries on her face. So strange. That zombie didn't seem to have any intention of hurting Xiao Budian. But why was Xiao Budian with her? And she took Xiao Budian away. Her reaction was as if she had robbed her precious treasure. Her reaction was so innocent, like a child. And Lin Xiao didn't find any malice on her body. Even if Xiao Budian was taken away, she didn't get angry. Instead, she was crying. Lin Xiao felt that she thought of a possibility. Originally, she didn't believe that there were zombies who protected their humanity. But after meeting Xiadong, Junjun and Chou Lily, she had to believe it. Could it be that the zombie outside was in the same situation as Chou Lily? Lin Xiao sat and pondered. At this time, Xiao Budian beside her slowly opened her eyes. Lin Xiao immediately noticed and turned her head to look at her. Then, he met the little guy's somewhat perplexed big eyes. But after Xiao Budian looked at her for a second, the confusion in her eyes suddenly turned into fear. Her eyes widened and her body suddenly shrank. She rolled and crawled to sit up. Then she desperately retreated. Lin Xiao saw her like this and was stunned. She quickly held her down, fearing that she would fall to the other side of the bed if she retreated any further. Feeling her panic, fear and helplessness, Lin Xiao knew that this child didn't recognize her. But it was normal because she was wearing a hat and glasses. There were no scars on her face. After Xiao Budian was held down by her, her body froze. Then she started to tremble. She still remembered the scene of the car flipping, so she wasn't feeling very well now. Lin Xiao held down her little feet and found that her whole body was stiff and trembling. That extreme fear was transmitted from her feet to Lin Xiao's hands. But Xiao Budian still didn't cry. Instead, she tightly buried her head in her knees. This was just like the first time she was saved by Lin Xiao. The child's entire heart had collapsed. Lin Xiao didn't dare to touch her. After he found out that she wouldn't move at all, only then did she slowly let go of her hand. She wanted to reach out and touch her head, but she was afraid of provoking her. After some thought, he suddenly remembered the gray rabbit. She immediately stood up, turned around and ran into the bushes beside the strawberry field. At this time, the people who were taking a bath on the other side simply rubbed themselves and put on their pants. However, their upper bodies were still bare. Because his shirt had been used as a towel by them, it was now all wet. After a round of scrubbing and washing, the group of originally dirty big men became much more refreshed. Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly run into the grass next to the strawberry field to look for something, Lu Tianyi and the others walked over to Wu Yueling. When he got to the bed, he confirmed that it was really the little princess of their base. Of the 3 leaders, only Wu Changyue had a daughter. Therefore, she became the little princess of the base. It's really the little princess, but how could she? Lu Tianyi looked at the little princess with great confusion. He looked up at Lin Xiao's figure. He found that the guy was drilling into the grass to look for something. What is she doing? Kong Qingming also looked up at Lin Xiao, thought for a moment and said, maybe she's looking for that rabbit. Didn't we see a gray rabbit last time? Lu Tianyi was a little confused. He turned to look at him and asked, rabbit? Why is she looking for a rabbit now? Kong Qingming shrugged and said, how would I know? I'm just guessing. Xiedong also walked over. As long as he knew that the little princess knew that rabbit, as she definitely didn't know Lin Xiao now. After all, Lin Xiao's appearance had changed greatly. He looked at Wu Yueling's appearance and wondered what kind of shock this child had received. How did it become like this? What happened outside? After a while, he saw Lin Xiao come out with the gray rabbit. Lu Tianyi looked at Kong Qingming in surprise. He was actually going to catch a rabbit. Lin Xiao walked over with the rabbit and saw a few people standing at the end of Wu Yueling's bed. They were looking at her with a curious gaze. Xiedong and Lin Xiao looked at each other. The 2 of them seemed to understand each other. The others were at a loss. Lin Xiao walked over but didn't sit on the bed. Instead, she gently put the little rabbit on the bed and took 2 steps back. Now this rabbit could recognize people. The little rabbit curled up into a gray ball of fur on the bed. It moved its nose. After sniffing for a few seconds, it slowly hopped towards Wu Yueling's position. Huh, why isn't it running? It's actually leaning over? Huang Shou and the others who came over saw the rabbit actually lean towards Wu Yueling. They asked softly in a curious manner. Lu Tianyi and the others looked at Lin Xiao, not knowing what was going on. When this rabbit saw them before, it disappeared with a whoosh. It meant that it was still afraid of people. Now it was approaching the little princess. It was indeed very strange. Was it not afraid of the little princess? Or was it because the little princess was a child and so wasn't afraid? Lin Xiao looked at the little gray rabbit lean towards Tiny Tot and let out a sigh of relief. No one went closer because they all knew that it would only make the child more afraid. She was already scared to death. If she was stimulated further, she would probably faint. The little gray rabbit hopped closer and closer to Tiny Tot. It didn't know Tiny Tot's current emotions, but it still liked Tiny Tot's scent, so it gently rubbed against her feet. Xiao Budian only felt that her ankle was touched by something furry, giving her a fright. Her entire body trembled again. But slowly, the furry thing that was leaning against her feet would move around, and it made her feet a little itchy. But she still didn't dare to move. She maintained her original stiff posture. The little rabbit didn't get a response from her, so it jumped onto her foot and stepped on it. Then it squatted down on her feet. The surrounding people. Seeing this, Lin Xiao was relieved. She turned to the strawberry field and picked a few ripe strawberries. Then, she washed them and walked back to the bed. After a while, Tiny Tot slowly calmed down. And because she was distracted by the thing on her feet, she didn't feel as scared as before. Then she quietly peeked out one eye to look at her feet that was pressed by a ball of fur. She saw a big ball of gray fur. It covered her whole little foot. Huh, this ball of fur looks a little familiar. Wu Yueling suddenly forgot her previous fear. She curiously looked at the ball of fur on her feet. Chapter 218. Wu Yueling's attention was attracted by the gray fur. She slowly revealed her other eye. After looking at it for a while, she found that the fur was moving and seemed to have 2 long ears. Why did it look like a rabbit? Where did the rabbit come from? And it felt so familiar. She wanted to reach out and touch it, but she keenly felt that people around her were looking at her. So she didn't dare to move again and quickly buried her eye again. Lin Xiao glanced at them and suddenly turned her face to them, making an expression to ask them to step back a little. But only Kong Qingming saw her expression, because the others were looking at Wu Yueling. Kong Qingming looked at her. Lin Xiao whispered a word, "Step back." Kong Qingming looked at her. then at Lu Qianni and the others. Finally he looked at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao nodded to him. Kong Qingming touched Lu Qianni's smooth arm with his hand. Lu Qianni turned his head to look at him. Kong Qingming signaled Tiny Tot with his eyes and said, "Step back a little, give her some space." Then he stepped back 2 meters to the side. Lu Qianni looked back at Tiny Tot, then turned and left. When he left, he also pulled the others away. Lin Xiao stood there with her arms crossed, quietly feeling the change of Tiny Tot's mood. Tiny Tot felt that there was one less person around, so she quietly raised her head and looked to the side. She found a person wearing a hat and black glasses standing next to her. Strange person. But the other party was not very close to her, so although Wu Yueling was very concerned, she was not nervous. At this time the fur on her feet moved, and a rabbit's head was raised. 2 eyes looked at her. Wu Yueling suddenly became happy. She released her hands from her knees in surprise. Slowly, she picked up the gray rabbit. It was really this rabbit. After confirming that this rabbit was the one she knew, Wu Yueling suddenly relaxed. She raised her head and looked around. The grass, the lake. They were still there, but there were a lot more things here. There weren't so many beds, sofas, cabinets, tables and so on before. Where did so many things come from now? By the way, where did the ugly zombie sister go? After knowing where this was, Wu Yueling immediately turned her eyes to look for Lin Xiao. But she was still looking for Lin Xiao with her long hair and a large ugly scar on her face. She completely ignored Lin Xiao wearing a hat in front of her. Where did the zombie sister go? Wu Yueling held the little rabbit in her arms and looked left and right. All she saw was a group of men she did not know, and they were all naked. So strange. Lin Xiao knew she was looking for her, so she raised a hand slightly. He shook his head at her and said, "Ling?" Wu Yueling looked back at her in confusion. Lin Xiao was still holding a handful of strawberries in his other hand. At this time he walked over lightly. Then, he squatted down in front of Wu Yueling and looked up at her. "Eat grass berries," she told her, holding out the strawberry. She looked back at Yueling and said, "Wu Ling said." Facing Wu Yueling, he gently pulled down his glasses a little, revealing a pair of dark, cold eyes. Others might be scared to see her eyes, but Wu Yueling was not afraid. Wu Yueling stared at Lin Xiao's eyes with her eyes wide open. She stared at Lin Xiao with a puzzled expression. Lin Xiao smiled and pushed the glasses back to their original position. She continued to put the strawberries in front of Wu Yueling. She said. Wu Yueling's brain couldn't react. She frowned slightly and looked at Lin Xiao in confusion. She wanted to say, "You are not her. You don't have long hair, ugly scars," and, thinking of this, Wu Yueling suddenly looked at Lin Xiao's chest. Well, she remembered that the zombie sister had a flat chest. But her eyes were also black, just like the zombie sister. Lin Xiao knew she didn't believe her, which was normal. But it was difficult for her to let her recognize her now. What should she do? Sure enough, children were the best. Suddenly, she saw something familiar in Wu Yueling's pocket. She looked carefully. Hey, wasn't that the grass dragonfly she made for her before? But why was it still green? Shouldn't it have been killed? Seeing the grass dragonfly, Lin Xiao suddenly had an idea. She immediately stood up, turned around and walked to the grass. She squatted down and picked a few blades of grass, then walked back. Lin Xiao sat at the foot of the bed and began to weave the grass dragonfly for Xiao Budian. Seeing Lin Xiao's action, Wu Yueling's eyes were fixed. She stared at Lin Xiao folding a few long blades of grass into the shape of a grass dragonfly. Wu Yueling seemed to have thought of something. She lowered her head and took out the grass dragonfly from her pocket. Then she looked at her own, then looked at Lin Xiao's new one. Her expression was a bit confused. Lin Xiao put the new one next to her, then sat there and closed her eyes to look outside. When he looked outside the suite, he found that the strange zombie girl was gone. Lin Xiao opened her eyes and looked at Wu Yueling. She didn't understand how this child got together with the zombie girl. But at this time the zombie girl was angry, because she was now rushing into the group of zombies with a murderous aura. Her claws smashed the heads of the zombies one by one. In the blink of an eye, the ground around her was covered with the corpses of all kinds of zombies. The fatal wound was that their skulls had been smashed. On the other side, Xiao Yunlong was squatting on one side waiting for Meng Yu to wake up. Mengyu, who was lying on a two-seater sofa, moved her eyelids. Then she slowly opened her eyes. Aha! She moved slightly, then groaned because of the pain all over her body. Xiao Yunlong suddenly looked up, looking at her in surprise. Mengyu, you're awake. Mengyu frowned and was about to sit up, but Xiao Yunlong quickly helped her. After sitting up, she looked around. She suddenly asked Lingling, Lingling, why don't I see Lingling? Xiao Yunlong was silent for a moment, then said with a sad face, Lingling, she was taken away by the zombie king. Mengyu immediately widened her eyes when she heard this. Grabbing his arm in panic, she shouted, How could you let it take Lingling away? Why did you let it take Lingling? Cough, cough, cough. But before she finished speaking, she felt a suffocating feeling in her chest. Then she coughed uncontrollably. Xiao Yunlong hurriedly gently patted her back, saying worriedly, Don't get excited. Try to sense Lingling's position now, see if we can find her. Although he knew that so much time had passed, the hope of Lingling being alive was very slim. But he couldn't do nothing because the guilt in his heart was tormenting him. Why didn't the zombie kill them directly and eat their hearts? Then they wouldn't have to suffer this kind of torture now, if Lingling was no longer here. Chapter 219. Mengyu stared blankly at him, suddenly without any reaction. Xiao Yunlong saw her in a daze and said, What's wrong with you? Quickly sense it. Mengyu suddenly came back to her senses. She immediately closed her eyes and carefully sensed. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. 5 minutes later, Mengyu opened her eyes. She suddenly asked, How long have I been unconscious? When Xiao Yunlong saw her expression, he had an ominous premonition. Although he was already mentally prepared before, but seeing Mengyu's expression, however, he still felt despair. Mengyu's reaction indicated that she did not sense the aura of the seed in little Lingling's body. The person died. The seed in her body, and also died. He lowered his head, letting go of Mengyu and squatting on the ground, burying his head in his 2 palms. 3 hours, Mengyu's eyes widened and then turned red. Moist tears fell from her eyes. Xiao Yunlong looked up and said, Then what do we do now? Go find Lingling? Mengyu looked at him blankly with red eyes. Find? Where to find? I can't sense any aura now. Xiao Yunlong closed his eyes deeply and opened them again after a few seconds. He seemed to have made up his mind and said, Let's go find the leader. At least, let him know that this matter is our fault. We did not help him look after Lingling. Even if he kills me. Mengyu suddenly laughed. Haha, kill you? What's the use of killing us? Haha. Although her tone was smiling, her expression was empty. There were 2 streaks of tears on her face. And Mengyu was not only thinking about Wu Chengyue's feelings, she herself was also very upset. She had always taken care of Wu Yueling as her own daughter, hoping that Wu Chengyue would accept her one day. But now it was all over. Wu Yueling was taken away from her and Xiao Yunlong by the zombie. How could she have the face to see him? Poor little Yueling, she was harmed by them. She was still so young. Xiao Yunlong took a deep breath and said, No matter what, we still have to tell him. Then go with him to find that zombie. At least, we still have to take revenge. Mengyu's expression froze as she looked up at him. Yes, no matter what. Even if Wu Chengyue killed them, they would accept it, but they still had to take revenge. Thus, the 2 of them immediately set off to find Wu Chengyue. Mengyu was injured, so she was directly carried away by the tall Xiao Yunlong. Rumble, thunder boomed outside and the cold rain poured down. On the other side, Wu Chengyue stood on the balcony of the top floor of a building near West Lake. After the apocalypse, there were a lot of abandoned buildings, empty and ownerless. Wu Chengyue stood on the balcony and looked at the rain outside. The sky was dark. She seemed to be crying sadly, but no one knew who she was sad for. The rain hit the ground, the roof, and the leaves, to wash away the dust of the apocalypse. As Wu Chengyue watched, a subtle feeling suddenly arose in his heart. This was not a good feeling, and it made him feel a little suffocated. He didn't know if it was because of the weather that made him feel a little depressed. Thinking of the person who dared to snatch his corpse nucleus, Wu Chengyue had a rare gloomy face. There was a chill exuding from his body. If there was someone standing next to him at this time, they would feel that the rainy weather outside was warmer than being next to him. He was infuriated someone dared to snatch his things. Really bold. He looked up at the sky, although the anger in his heart had been forcibly suppressed. But after calming down, he thought that even if he stayed here, it would not do. It would be better to go back to his daughter's side first, and then send someone to check the situation here. He wanted to continue guarding by himself, but he was always worried about his daughter. Although there was level 6 Xiao Yunlong to protect Lingling, if there was a second zombie king in Hangzhou, then Xiao Yunlong would not be able to play any role. Wu Changyue looked at the increasingly heavy rain outside, thinking that he would go back after the rain subsided a little. He had already noted down the aura of the person who dared to snatch his corpse nucleus, and he would certainly send someone to find out. Maybe he would encounter him by chance in the future. At that time he would like to see who had such great ability to snatch things from his hands. At this time Wu Yueling, who was staying in Lin Xiao's space, was no longer so afraid. But she was still very vigilant. But the furball child in her arms made her feel a lot more at ease. The strawberry that Lin Xiao placed next to her was also eaten by her. Wu Yueling recognized Xie Dong, but she could not recognize Lin Xiao. After all, her father said, as long as it was a very powerful zombie. Its eyes were all black. But now, was this a zombie or a person? His appearance was clearly the same as the people in the base, not as ugly as those zombies outside. And very scary. But this zombie also knows how to weave dragonflies. And she had not seen that zombie. Where did she go? Lin Xiao did not care much about Xiao Budian's dilemma. Anyway, it was fine as long as she was not afraid and nervous. It did not matter whether she recognized who she was or not. What Lin Xiao was thinking now was, how could she send the child back? After all, she had just snatched the child's father's big monster not long ago. And now she was returning the favor so quickly. This was really a coincidence. However, this time she did not need to personally send the child back. She just happened to have people here. Lin Xiao looked at Lu Tianyi and the others. It was better to send Xiao Budian back as well. Anyway, Wu Changyue was their leader. She could send this team to Wu Changyue and let him take them back. In this way, she did not need to send them back to the base. Moreover, she did not know if that man now knew that his daughter was in danger. He was still in the mood to fight over there. If he knew that his daughter was taken away by a level 6 zombie, she did not know what expression he would have. Thinking of this, she gently stood up. She walked in front of Xie Dong, took the writing board, and then waved to Lu Tianyi and the others. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming did not know what she wanted to do, and walked over with some puzzlement. What are you going to do? After Lu Tianyi walked over, he looked back at Xiao Budian on the bed. It was amazing that the child was not afraid. This emotional change was too fast. Didn't they say that autistic children were very sensitive to the environment? Just now when they came to a strange environment, they would feel insecure and their emotions would be tense. But looking at the current appearance of the little princess, other than the reaction she showed when she woke up, why was she so calm now? Or could it be that the rabbit made her not afraid? Divert attention? Or could it be that there was some magic in this space? Could it appease the emotions of a child? This doubt not only rose in Lu Tianyi's heart, but also in the hearts of others. Therefore, they made a bunch of wild guesses without making any sense. Chapter 220. Lin Xiao wrote, "This child's father is outside. Please help send her to her father's side." Lu Tianyi and the others looked at each other with joy in their eyes. Chief Wu is outside? Is his army there too? Lin Xiao shook his head, looked at them and said, "I didn't see." She couldn't possibly say that she only saw Wu Changyue chasing the lightning-type zombie king by himself, right? In the end, the zombie king's corpse core was already in her hands. They would definitely know what had happened if they went out. If he were to spill the beans and let Wu Changyue know that he was the one who stole his kill, that would not be fun. Kong Qingming suddenly looked at her strangely and said, "Since her father is outside, can't you just send her there directly?" He looked at Lin Xiao. As long as he didn't take off his glasses, Lin Xiao would be fine. No one would discover her identity, right? Lu Tianyi asked curiously, "What I want to know now is, how did this child fall into your hands?" Lin Xiao wrote, "She was captured by that zombie king. She didn't write the rest of the sentence, so everyone could guess what was going on. Lin Xiao thought it was funny. She had just made up another one, but now she really had one. Is it the one you mentioned before? Xiedong also looked at Lin Xiao in surprise. He didn't expect another one to come. Fuck. Are zombie kings so cheap now? It's like cabbages everywhere. Huang Shou said with his eyes wide open. Kong Qingming rubbed his chin with one hand, looked at Lin Xiao and asked, "So you stole the child from the zombie king? You really like to steal from the zombie kings." Lin Xiao glanced at him but did not say anything. Lu Qianni nodded and said, "It's no problem for us to send the child back to the leader. But let's wait until our clothes are dry and we get dressed before we go." As he spoke, he glanced at the naked upper bodies of the others. Lu Qianni's words made the few people who didn't pay much attention to him. Suddenly he felt a chill on his body. Lin Xiao casually glanced at them. Only then did he seriously look at their figures. It's alright. Lu Qianni and Kong Qingming were not thin. They were very sturdy and tall. Broad shoulders, narrow waist and perky buttocks. It should feel good. Young people's bodies are really good. Therefore Lin Xiao suddenly sized them up seriously. There was another burst of cold air. Lin Xiao only took a few glances before he retracted his gaze and wrote, "It's raining outside, the temperature should be very low. I'll go and see if there are any clean clothes for you." Just as she was about to turn around and leave, someone suddenly tugged at her pants. Lin Xiao paused and looked down. However, she discovered that Xiao Budian had already arrived at her side while carrying the gray rabbit. And when did this little guy run down? But this action of grabbing her pants, did it mean that he recognized her? Wu Yueling held the gray-haired ball in her arms with one hand and grabbed the side of Lin Xiao's pants with the other. He raised his head and looked at Lin Xiao blankly. In fact, she still couldn't recognize that Lin Xiao was the zombie. However, she was sensitive enough to sense that this person gave her a familiar feeling. There were other strangers here, so the shy Wu Yueling immediately ran to Lin Xiao's side. She felt a bit safer by her side. The others looked at Wu Yueling curiously. Lu Qianni came over and then squatted in front of her. He smiled and said to Wu Yueling, "Lingling, do you still remember me? We've met before." When Wu Yueling saw him coming over, she stepped back and hid behind Lin Xiao. Hearing Lu Qianni call her, she just tilted her head and looked at him with half an eye. Behind them, Kong Qingming and Huang Shou also came over. Seeing that there were a lot of people coming over, Wu Yueling hid behind Lin Xiao. She didn't even show half an eye. Dad said to stay away from people who are not wearing clothes. Seeing Wu Yueling's appearance, Lu Qianni looked back at the two people next to him and said with dissatisfaction, "There are too many of you, you'll scare her. Also, don't walk around naked in front of a little girl, okay?" Kong Qingming turned his head and looked at him strangely. "You have the nerve to say that to us? You're wearing clothes?" At this time, Lin Xiao waved at the few people and made a dispersing gesture, "Go." She pulled Wu Yueling back to the place where the furniture was and then sat down with her in her arms. She squatted down in front of her and said, "You're outside. I asked them." Then she pointed at Lu Qianni and the others and continued, "Take it." Hearing that her father was outside, Wu Yueling's eyes immediately lit up. She looked at Lin Xiao happily, hoping that she could take her to see her father as soon as possible. Lin Xiao continued to say, "Raining outside, there is stop them." Although Lin Xiao spoke very slowly, Wu Yueling was not in a hurry and listened to her patiently. When hearing that it was raining, Wu Yueling's mood suddenly sank. She let go of her hand that was holding Lin Xiao's pants and was about to touch the gray rabbit. Lin Xiao noticed that she was in a low mood and was a little curious. But she didn't ask her, just said, "Don't be afraid." Then she raised her hand and reached out to Wu Yueling's head. Finding that she didn't have too much of a reaction, she continued to touch her head. At this time, no one noticed that a branch of a vine was quietly climbing out of the lake. Then it extended towards Tiny Tot. Lin Xiao was thinking whether she should go out to find clothes for these big men. It was not good to let them wear wet clothes. They would catch a cold. But if she didn't wear them, she would just wander around naked in front of the child. It was not good either. But she wanted to go out, and now she was afraid that Tiny Tot would be too nervous. She had to rely on him. Lin Xiao turned her head to look at the others. Suddenly, her eyes swept to the stove by the lake and the pile of dry firewood next to it. Yes, there was a pile of dry branches and firewood, which Lin Xiao had picked up from outside when she was free. It was for Junjun to make food for Tong Tong because there was no gas or something like that. Of course, she could only use firewood. So there were a lot of firewood next to it. By the way, she could let them make a fire to dry their clothes. Thinking of this, she suddenly whistled at Xie Dong. However, her whistle attracted everyone's attention. Lin Xiao didn't care and waved at Xie Dong, asking him to come over. Xie Dong came over and looked at her in confusion. Lin Xiao took the writing board and wrote, "See those firewood? Make a fire to dry their clothes. I won't go out to look for it." Xie Dong looked back. Yes, there was a pile of firewood over there that they had been ignoring. In fact, it would dry the clothes very quickly after burning it. He immediately nodded, turned around and walked over there. Then he waved at Huang Shou. Chapter 221. Watching them prepare the fire to dry the clothes, Lin Xiao turned back to look at Tiny Tot. Suddenly, something quietly wrapped around Lin Xiao's hand. She looked down. She found a piece of vine climbing up her hand from the ground, and the other end of the vine extended into the lake. "Mama! I remember her." Huh. Lin Xiao looked at the vine a little surprised. At this time, Wu Yueling also saw the vine wrapped around Lin Xiao's hand. She didn't know what it was, but Lin Xiao's reaction seemed very calm. Lin Xiao turned her head to look at Wu Yueling, and found that this tiny tot was not afraid. She seemed to be curiously staring at the little man wrapped around her hand, as if wondering how this thing appeared. When did it wrap around Lin Xiao's hand? At this time, the little man suddenly let go of Lin Xiao, and then fell to the ground. But soon it crawled towards Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling was shocked to see the vine suddenly crawling towards her. He hurriedly withdrew his legs and moved his body back slightly. The little man's perception was very sharp, and it noticed Tiny Tot's fear. It stopped moving, and then twisted the tip of the branch to look at Lin Xiao. It seemed a little helpless and didn't know what to do. Lin Xiao looked at it and Tiny Tot with a curious expression. Was this little man going to recognize Tiny Tot as its companion now? Seeing the little man stop, Tiny Tot's heart was slightly relieved. She looked at Lin Xiao blankly, and curiously looked at the tip of the little man's branch. In fact, she didn't seem to be very afraid now, because she often saw Meng use little grass move and play. So she wasn't very repulsed by a plant like the little man that could crawl around. It was just that the little man was still strange to her, so she was a little scared. Lin Xiao sensed that the two's emotions were almost the same and smiled. She said to Tiny Tot, "It's called, little man. Man, don't be afraid." Then she picked up the little man's vine tip and extended it in front of Tiny Tot. The little man's vine tip circled around Lin Xiao's palm, entangling her. Then it stood a little bit on her open palm. Lin Xiao raised her palm and let little man stand on it. Xiao Budian saw Lin Xiao's actions, and then looked at the two small leaves on the tip of the vine. He looked at Lin Xiao hesitantly and then at her hand. His gaze moved back and forth between Lin Xiao's face and the vine in her hand. Lin Xiao patiently guided it and said, "Come. It is a very lovable. Can speak, oh huh? Can even talk? Really?" Wu Yueling's round eyes revealed a look of surprise. Lin Xiao smirked and nodded. Lu Tianyi and the others were curiously sizing them up on the other side. But they also knew that the little princess was afraid of strangers, so they didn't dare to approach her. Moreover, from this angle, he couldn't see the little vine's branches. Therefore, they thought that Lin Xiao was communicating with the little princess, but they didn't know that Lin Xiao was introducing two friends to each other. 2 or 3 of them were fire elementalists. Although they had recovered less than 30% of their energy, they were still unable to attack. But they could still start a fire. They set up a pile of firewood and started a big fire. Everyone surrounded the fire and held up their clothes to warm themselves. "That's strange, the little princess isn't afraid of that big sister. Why?" Huang Shou flipped the clothes over and looked back at Lin Xiao. He said curiously. The others looked back at the situation over there, and it indeed seemed to be very harmonious. "Maybe it's because big sister is a good person?" Lu Jing replied. The others rolled their eyes at him. "Are we all bad people?" Lu Jing, we're not bad people. But we're weird people because we don't wear clothes. The others. Xiao Budian's big eyes were full of curiosity, and she looked at Lin Xiao with an expression that said, "You're lying to me." Lin Xiao looked at her funny and said, "I didn't feel right." As she said that, she gently reached out and pulled up Xiao Budian's hand that was on the gray rabbit's back. Then she grabbed her index finger and touched the tip of the little vine together. Xiao Budian fiercely retracted his finger, then stared at Lin Xiao with his eyes wide open. Disbelief was written all over his face. Lin Xiao nodded at her with a smile and asked, "Yes or no?" The little guy suspiciously nodded her head. She wasn't sure either. "Is it true?" At this time the little vine wrapped around Lin Xiao's hand twisted its sharp vines, looking very happy. Mama, her expression is so funny, I want to play with her." Lin Xiao glanced at little man, then said to Tiny Tot tentatively, "Again?" Wu Yueling's curiosity was piqued. She looked at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao nodded at her. This time Lin Xiao didn't need to do anything. Little guy slowly extended his fingers, wanting to touch little man's vines, but also not daring to do so. "Little guy, don't be afraid. I won't bite you." Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao. Was this little guy calling him? That's right, little Lingling is Tiny Tot. Tiny Tot is little Lingling, huh? Do you know what I'm thinking? Wu Yueling looked at little man in wonder. She thought in her heart. Then she saw the two sharp leaves of the little vine being swung back and forth, feeling very proud of itself. I know, I don't know how to talk to you, Wu Yueling thought. How do you know? What are you? I'm little man. Call me little man. Call me little man. Lin Xiao sensed the interaction between the two and found that they had begun to get along. Her mood also became happy. She pulled the vine away from her hand and put it next to Tiny Tot. Then she said to little man's sharp point in her heart, "I'm going to find the location of Tiny Tot's father. You play with her." The little vine twisted its two sharp little leaves. Little man responded, "Okay, Mama. I'll look after her." Maybe because little man was a plant, Lin Xiao felt that the message it sent had a unique tone. It was as if it was acting coquettishly. Lin Xiao said to Wu Yueling, "Play." "Oh, it is." At this time little man suddenly said, Mama, I can help you repair your body now. I have a lot of energy." Lin Xiao nodded and glanced at the people around the fire. She nodded and replied in her heart, "Okay, I'll go down to the lake after those people leave." Little man replied, Wait for you. Lin Xiao stood up and looked at Wu Yueling's reaction. She found that Wu Yueling was only looking at her, and didn't reach out her little hand to grab her. Maybe it was because she also wanted to see her father as soon as possible. Chapter 222. Lin Xiao turned around and glanced at the others, then took a step back. Her figure flashed and disappeared. Huh. Big sister went out. What? Did she go to find Leader Wu? Huang Shou looked up and saw that Lin Xiao had disappeared. The others also looked back and then turned their faces back. They said indifferently, maybe. Huang Shou, add some firewood. The fire is getting smaller. Oh, Zhang Xiaonian suddenly sighed and said, it would be great if there was a sweet potato or cassava to roast in the charcoal. The others rolled their eyes at him and said, even if there was, you wouldn't dare to eat it. There were viruses everywhere now. Who would dare to eat something that had not been purified in the base? At this time Huang Shou said, but didn't we also eat that mutated strawberry? But it's strange that we are really fine. It's been 2 days. Lu Tianyi nodded and said, don't worry, we should be fine after 2 days. Besides, she didn't have to give us poisonous food to eat. And look, didn't she also give it to the little princess? Kong Qingming looked at him and suddenly said, have you forgotten who she used to be? As soon as this sentence came out, everyone immediately quieted down. Lu Tianyi and Xiedong's expressions were a little gloomy, while Huang Shou, Lu Jing, and the others were at a loss. Huh, Vice Captain, you mean, so you know her? Kong Qingming looked at Lu Tianyi's gloomy face and knew that he didn't want to hear this. But he still needed to remind him, even if that person had changed a lot. But with what she had done in the past, it was better to be on guard. What's going on? Suddenly feeling that the atmosphere had changed because of the two captains' words, the others' blank expressions were filled with doubt and confusion. What's going on? Could it be? There was something between the captain and that big sister? But they didn't know this big sister. How could she be related to the captain? But now that they thought about it, if it was because she had something to do with the captain, then she came to save them. This seemed to make sense. Originally, they thought that some kind-hearted person passed by and saved them. It turned out that there were other reasons. Lu Tiany's eyes flashed and he suddenly said, "Anyway, she has eaten it. What else can she do? I choose to believe her. You should also find that she is a different person from before. If she didn't admit it herself, do you think she is the same person?" Kong Qingming looked at him speechlessly, then looked back at his clothes. That was right. They could only choose to believe her now. What else could they do? Now, he had given them food and water, not to mention that he had saved their lives. At this time, Huang Shou suddenly looked at everyone and pointed to one of the 2 piles of potatoes. "Oh right, aren't there potatoes over there?" After a while, he came back with a pile of potatoes. He xiao 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 jing xiao and he soon xiao and he returned. Xiao 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 Lin xiao Huang. Xiao xiao I. At this time, Lin Xiao did not know that Kong Qingming and Lu Tiany were using her as a topic of discussion for a while, because she was standing by a window in the corridor of a building. She was standing by the window in the corridor of a building. Smelling the sour air outside, Lin Xiao couldn't help but sneeze. Then she rubbed her nose and looked at the sky. The climate after Doomsday was not good. It was extremely hot when the sun came out. The temperature was as high as 40 to 50 degrees. It could even reach 60 degrees and roast people. At night it was extremely cold. When it rained, the rainwater was corrosive and acidic, which was why Lin Xiao could smell a sour smell. Lin Xiao held her hands in front of her chest. It seemed that she couldn't smell other people now. The rain washed away the air and it was filled with a sour smell. It affected her nose a lot. She didn't know if Wu Chongyue was still in the same direction. If he left, she might not be able to find him. However, the troops he brought should also be nearby. If she couldn't find him, she would go find his subordinates. Meng Yu and Xiao Yunlong thought that Wu Chongyue's soldiers were dead. They were killed by the level 6 zombie king. But they didn't know. They were chased by the zombie king. Not long after, the people on the ground woke up. The squad leaders were the first to wake up. After all, they were level 5 psychics and their bodies recovered faster than others. Of course, when they opened their eyes, they found themselves lying on the ground defenseless. They quickly sat up, only to find that the others were also lying on the ground, not knowing if they were dead or alive. They immediately got up in panic and went to check on the others. But they found that they were just unconscious. But there was no injury on their bodies. And they woke up after shaking them twice. When they woke everyone up and checked, they found that everyone had been knocked unconscious. But no one knew what happened. When they rushed to the deputy leader's room, they found that there was no one in the room. And there were traces of fighting. What happened? No one knew, but they all knew. They were hit on the back of the head and knocked unconscious. When they woke up, they still felt a dull pain in the back of their heads. They didn't know who knocked them out. And all of them added up, there were nearly 1,000 people. To be able to take them down without making a sound, this was a little scary. But soon they were glad that when they fainted, there were no zombies in this area. Otherwise, wouldn't they all be eaten? But the strange thing was, why didn't zombies appear? It was too strange that there were no zombies. Before they fainted, they clearly noticed that there were a lot of zombies in this area. As long as there were zombies coming from the periphery, they would open fire to clear them. But when they all fainted on the ground, there was no one to clear the nearby zombies. There should be a lot of zombies coming over. More than a dozen squad leaders gathered in the room where Xiao Yunlong and the others were, discussing with each other. What now? We don't know where the deputy leader and the leader went. Looking at the situation here, they should have been forced to leave in a hurry. Without orders, we can't just evacuate. We also don't know where the deputy leader went. Let's first send someone to report to the leader. But the leader's location is in the zombie city. If we go in, we may encounter a level 5 zombie leader. Then we must go, as long as there are a few more people. And we don't know where the deputy leader and the leader went, and more importantly, we don't know where Miss Lingling went. It's fine if she is with the deputy leader, but what if something happened? No matter what, we must first report the situation. That's the only way. So the result of the discussion was that the 5 level 5 squad leaders with abilities led dozens of people into the city. Chapter 223. The rain poured down for 2 hours. Lin Xiao stayed in the space and watched them roast potatoes. While talking to Xiao Budian seemed to have believed that she was the zombie sister from before, but she didn't understand why Lin Xiao had changed her appearance. Looking at Xiao Budian staring at her face with a curious expression, Lin Xiao patiently said to her, "Your face is cured." The little guy nodded his head, half believing and half doubting. Lu Tianyi, who had already put on dry clothes, found a bowl and filled it with 2 or 3 roasted potatoes. Then he stood by and peeled them while looking at Lin Xiao and asked, "How do you know that these mutated potatoes and pumpkins can be eaten? Aren't you afraid that we will all become zombies?" Lin Xiao looked up at him and didn't say anything. When Xiao Budian saw Lu Tianyi coming over, she subconsciously leaned towards Lin Xiao. Then she hid behind her, revealing only one small foot. Lu Tianyi looked at her silently for a few moments and suddenly asked, "What are you going to do after sending us away? You came here to look for the planning bureau. Is there anything you want there?" Lin Xiao looked at him and nodded. She wanted to go to the planning bureau to find all kinds of information about the resources in the city so that she might know where the resources in Hangzhou were stored. Although she also thought that those places might have been swept by people who used to work in the planning bureau. But the situation at the end of the world was so critical, there must be a place that had not been swept. Lu Tianyi's eyes flashed, and a trace of unknown emotion emerged. He asked, "Then will you return to the base? Or where will you settle in the future?" He knew that in her current condition she definitely couldn't go back to the base. And he was just asking casually what he really wanted to know. It was still the last question. Lin Xiao sensed his thoughts and looked at him from head to toe in surprise. After getting along with him for a few days, she really felt that this kid cared about her. Although Lin Xiao also understood that he actually cared about Lu Tianyi. But the relationship between the two of them was obviously very bad before. Why would he care about Lu Tianyi, his sister? With Lu Tianyu's attitude towards him, Lu Tianyi shouldn't be so stupid as to stick his face to him. Lin Xiao couldn't understand Lu Tianyu's attitude, and since he saw her this time, he didn't show any signs of rejection. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and continued to stare at Lu Tianyi in thought. Now that he thought about it, the images of every time he saw Lu Tianyi in Lu Tianyu's mind seemed to slowly become clear. In the beginning, the relationship between the two of them was still very bad. Both of them looked at each other as strangers, then walked away as if they didn't know each other. Even when he saw Lu Tianyi being bullied by others in the base, Lu Tianyi only watched coldly from the sidelines. He didn't interfere, but he didn't help either. However, when he thought about the few times they met, he realized that they would subconsciously avoid each other every time. However, Lin Xiao was keenly aware that Lu Tianyi, who had come later, was not a match for him. The look in his eyes changed. Although there were many complaints, hatred, and stubbornness, there was also a faint sense of anticipation. What was he expecting? Lin Xiao looked into his eyes. Lu Tianyi was getting goosebumps from the way she was sizing him up, and now he saw her staring at his eyes. He was even more puzzled. Lin Xiao raised his hand and gently pulled down his sunglasses, revealing a pair of dark eyes. Then she looked at him for 3 seconds before pushing the sunglasses back. "What? Is there a problem?" Lu Tianyi couldn't help but ask as Lin Xiao looked at him more and more. Lin Xiao said, "You're about? You care about me? We didn't have a good relationship before, did we?" Lu Tianyi looked at her and suddenly said, "Haven't you changed too? Well, if I say that I'm not your heartless sister, will you come and chop me now?" Lin Xiao thought silently in her heart. At this time, Xiao Budian poked his head out from behind Lin Xiao and looked at Lu Tianyi. Lu Tianyi smiled gently at her. Xiao Budian immediately retracted his head. Lin Xiao closed her eyes and looked outside, only to find that the rain had stopped. She turned to Xiao Budian and said, After that, she looked at Xiao Budian inquiringly. Xiao Budian looked at her with his bright eyes for a few seconds before nodding. Then he ran to the sofa with the rabbit in his arms and slept. Lin Xiao turned to look at Lu Tianyi and said, "Senyu." As she spoke, she glanced at the group of people, indicating that he should go and tell them. They were ready to go out. Lu Tianyi turned to the others and said, "Get ready to leave the space. Get ready." Lin Xiao followed him and waited for him to finish speaking. She raised her hand from the side and pressed his shoulder. Then the two of them flashed. Then they disappeared. Everyone quickly stood up. The next second they saw Lin Xiao come in again and then take two people out. After flashing back and forth 6 or 7 times, Lin Xiao finished taking people. She sighed. If only she didn't have to rely on touch to bring people into her space. How nice it would be if she could take everyone in with a wave of her hand. It would be so troublesome. After going out, they all appeared on the roof of a 3-story building, looking at the wet surroundings. The rain had just stopped, and there was a lot of moisture in the air. Lin Xiao stood on the side and sniffed the air. Before she could identify where Wu Chengyue was, suddenly, there was a burst of thunder in the sky. Rumble. Then before everyone could react, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky. It exploded towards the roof of their building. Gotcha, boom, fuck? Except for Lin Xiao, who reacted quickly and jumped to the next building. Everyone else rolled to the side with a confused look. I was just going to leave, but I didn't expect you to come out so soon. I'm really glad that I didn't go too far. Otherwise I would have let you escape. A faint voice came. The people who had been blasted by the thunder all looked in the direction of the sound. They saw a handsome man smiling faintly at the other side. Well, that was where the big sister was. Leader. Leader. Looking at the leader of their base, the others were still very surprised. Although they were a little confused by the inexplicable lightning strike, they had not yet reacted. However, Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming were not so embarrassed. Their reaction was only slightly worse than Lin Xiao's, and their movements were still very agile. After all, they were level 5 paranormals. However, the expressions of these two people were the same as the other members of their base. They were confused. They had no idea what was going on. Who knew when they were going to be struck? When they saw Wu Chengyue staring in Lin Xiao's direction with a smile on his face, they naturally looked in Lin Xiao's direction. Then they saw Lin Xiao turn around, looking like she was about to slip away. Everyone. Something happened. Chapter 224. Hearing Wu Chengyue's voice, Lin Xiao turned around. Then she flashed and immediately disappeared. The next second, Wu Chengyue appeared in the place where she had disappeared, and the smile on his face deepened. But the others next to him felt that within 3 meters of their leader's surroundings, there was a threatening chill. At this time, Lin Xiao was cursing in her heart. Why the hell did this man appear so quickly? And how did he know that she was here? Seeing Lin Xiao come in, Tiny Tot thought that she was going to take him out. He immediately ran over and hooked his arm around her. Lin Xiao looked at Tiny Tot, who ran to her side, and couldn't help but feel helpless. Originally, she felt that it was very unkind of her to steal his corpse core, but she didn't expect that she would return the favor so quickly. However, she saved his daughter from the hands of the zombie king and returned it to him. She should let the matter of the corpse core go. Although she had been struck by his lightning once before, she would save this hatred for the next time. Looking at Wu Chengyue's appearance, the people outside were all scared and their hearts were trembling. They didn't know why their leader wanted to strike them. Well, he didn't seem to be aiming at them but at that big sister. Lu Tianyi also wanted to figure out what was going on, so he quickly stood up. He said to Wu Chengyue, "Well, Leader Wu, we can discuss this. Can we not fight? What's going on?" Wu Chengyue, who was on the opposite roof, turned his head and looked at them. Then he walked over leisurely, stepped on the fence at the edge of the roof, and jumped over, landing gently in front of everyone. He put his hands in the pockets of his trousers and asked Lu Tianyi with a chuckle, "Is he with you? Do you know who he is?" Lu Tianyi looked at him in surprise and said, You don't even know her identity?" He was startled, thinking that Wu Chengyue knew that she was Lu Tianyi. Maybe he was looking for trouble because of that matter. He didn't expect Wu Chengyue to ask them who she was. It turned out that he didn't know. Wu Chengyue still said with a smile, "If I knew, I wouldn't be talking nonsense with you here." Lu Tianyi felt goosebumps all over his body because of his laughter. He couldn't help but say, "Then did she offend you in any way?" He felt that it was better to clarify the cause of the matter before talking about the little princess. Wu Chengyue's long and narrow eyes were slightly curved because of his smile. He looked at Lu Tianyi and said, "Aren't you with him? Didn't you notice that he obtained a corpse core a few days ago?" At this time, the others came to Lu Tiany's side and looked at Wu Chunghua curiously. When they heard Wu Chunghua mention the corpse core, they immediately thought of the corpse core that she had thrown into the lake. Kong Qingming crossed his arms in front of his chest, looked at Wu Chunghua in confusion and asked, "Hey? How did you know?" Then they saw Wu Chunghua laugh. "Haha, of course I know because I killed that Thunder Zombie King. But someone suddenly appeared and stole the Zombie King's head that I had just killed." Lu Tiany and the others. Was there something wrong with their ears? Why did they hear such strange words? Kong Qingming turned to look at Lu Tiany and asked, "Didn't she say it was another Zombie King? Why is it Leader Wu?" Lu Tiany looked at him and said, "How would I know?" Huang Shou looked at Zheng Xiaonian and said, "Ah, so that corpse core belongs to the leader. But why did she say it was another zombie?" Zheng Xiaonian shrugged and said, "How would I know?" The smile on Wu Chengyue's face became strange at this time, and he said, "Oh, so she compared me to another zombie king? Well, it doesn't matter, I don't mind that. But can any of you tell me his identity and origin?" Although he spoke with a faint smile on his face, he took out a hand from his pocket and held it horizontally to the side. A ball of lightning crackled in the palm of his hand. He slowly walked towards Lu Tiany and the others and said as he walked, "Maybe you can find a way to make him appear, and I won't do anything to you. But if he keeps hiding and you don't talk, then I have no choice but to treat you and him as his accomplices." "Hey, don't, leader. Let's calm down. Let's talk. I think there's some misunderstanding here." Everyone was scared by the lightning in his hand, and Kong Qingming quickly waved his hand and said. Wu Chunghua smiled, and this time it became a sneer. He said, "Oh, misunderstanding? You spent 2 or 3 days to kill a high-level zombie, but when you were ready to take the corpse core, it was suddenly taken away by a black hand. Can you tell me what kind of misunderstanding this is?" Kong Qingming looked at him with an awkward face. "Is this?" He turned his head and looked at Lu Tiany, but in his heart he thought, "Your sister really courted death once, and now she's doing it again." Lu Tiany also looked embarrassed. He cursed in his heart, "Fuck! Is this the zombie king you were talking about? This is clearly a level 2 zombie king, okay? It's fine if you stole other people's monsters, but don't let other people get hold of you." Now it throws them out again and slips into the space, letting them face the anger of the leader. This is too unfair. Zizizi, the lightning in Wu Chenghua's hand grew a little bigger. Lu Tiany and the others immediately took a step back. But it was a bit too cowardly to give up Lin Xiao in this situation, and Lin Xiao saved them before and gave them food and drink. They couldn't be ungrateful. But the anger of the leader was also very scary. This was especially true for Boss Wu, who was always smiling and had a kind look on his face. At this moment, Lu Jing suddenly said, "No, leader, you are still in the mood to ask about the corpse core. I would like to ask, did you put Miss Lingling somewhere nearby?" Lingling? Hearing Lu Jing's words, Wu Chengyue's eyes slightly sank. He asked, "How do you know?" Although Lingling and Xiao Yunlong were in the Binjiang district, it was not far from here. Wu Chengyue looked at Lu Jing, wondering if these people had met Xiao Yunlong and the others. But what did they mean by mentioning Lingling to him now? What was their intention? Without waiting for Lu Jing to answer, the staircase door on the roof of another building very close to them was suddenly opened. Then Xiao Yunlong came out with the unconscious Meng Yu on his back. Wu Chunghua, Lu Tiany and the others immediately turned to look at him. Then they saw Meng Yu, who was covered in blood on Xiao Yunlong's back, lying on his back with her head bowed. And Xiao Yunlong also slightly bowed his head, but his eyes did not look at them. Everyone was dumbfounded. Your mother. What was he trying to do this time? Chapter 225. Seeing the appearance of the two, Wu Chunghua could no longer talk to Lu Tiany. In a flash he leapt onto the balcony, and then appeared next to Xiao Yunlong. Yunlong. Mingyu. What's the matter with you two? Wu Chunghua came in front of them. The smile on his face had disappeared. He asked the two people with a dignified expression. Xiao Yunlong looked up slightly but did not look at Wu Chunghua. Wu Chunghua continued to ask anxiously, "Why are you guys here? Where's Lingling? How can you leave? What if there is a high-level zombie attack force?" On the other side, Lu Tiany and the others looked at each other with a puzzled expression. and then jumped down from that building to this side. They just did not stand too close to Wu Chengyue. Needless to say, looking at Deputy Leader Xiao, something must have happened. It was no wonder that little Princess Lingling was saved by Big Sister. It seemed that this matter was really unimaginable. Lu Tianyi and the others had already guessed it. But Wu Chengyue still did not know. And Wu Chengyue was also a little flustered at this time. Seeing the appearance of Xiao Yunlong and Meng Yu, he certainly knew that something had happened. But the important thing now was that his daughter was not with them. Xiao Yunlong, say something. Where's Lingling? And what's the matter with Meng Yu? Wu Chengyue stared closely at Xiao Yunlong, and then looked at Meng Yu. Xiao Yunlong glanced at him, and suddenly said in a hoarse voice with a sullen face, "I'm sorry." Wu Chengyue's pupils shrank. An ominous premonition suddenly rose in his heart. He shook his head in disbelief. He asked, "No, I don't want your apology. Why do you want to apologize? Lingling? Lingling? Where's Lingling?" He suddenly roared the last 3 words. But Xiao Yunlong's reaction was still 3 words. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Seeing that the energy around Wu Chengyue had begun to overflow, Lu Tianyi and the others knew that he might go berserk. He hurriedly shouted, "Wait a minute. Leader. Don't worry, don't get excited. Calm down. Calm down. Miss Lingling, she..." Wu Chengyue had confirmed the premonition in his heart from Xiao Yunlong's attitude. If Lingling had not had an accident, Xiao Yunlong would not say these 3 words to him. And he didn't even dare to look her in the eye. At this moment, his expression had already become somewhat ferocious. His originally long and beautiful eyes were now wide open, and a few blue veins were popping out on his forehead. Hearing Lu Tianyi's words, he turned his head and glared at Lu Tianyi, but his voice was gloomy. "What did you call me, Lung Jing? Do you know that I handed Lingling over to him before I came here? But he's not with Lingling right now? Do you know how much danger Lingling will be in if she doesn't have me and his protection? But he only brought Meng Yu here. What about my Lingling?" "Here. Your Lingling is here." Seeing Wu Chengyue's red eyes, everyone hurriedly replied, "Yes, Miss Lingling is fine." "Calm down first," Kong Qingming cautiously said. What a joke. What if this leader suddenly went crazy here? They were going to be in big trouble. Don't look at how the leader was usually smiling and easy to talk to, but when it came to his precious daughter, this easygoing man was about to become a violent terrorist. And he was still a 7th level psychic. If he couldn't control himself, his ability would go out of control. But it would explode. "What did you say?" These words were said by 2 people. Wu Chengyue and Xiao Yunlong turned to look at Kong Qingming at the same time. Wu Chengyue was stunned and did not speak. Xiao Yunlong said resolutely, "Impossible. How could Lingling be here? It's impossible for that zombie king to bring her here." In one sentence, Wu Chengyue's thoughts became true. When he heard Xiao Yunlong's last words, Wu Chengyue fiercely turned his head to stare at him. He asked, "What did you just say? What zombie king? Why is Lingling with it?" Xiao Yunlong glanced at Wu Chengyue, but hung his head in front of his ferocious expression. He murmured, "I'm sorry. I'm useless. I couldn't protect Lingling. She was taken away by a strange zombie king. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Wu Chengyue's pupils violently shrank again. He took a step back and said in disbelief, "No. How could there be a zombie king? You're lying to me, aren't you? Xiao Yunlong, are you lying to me?" Xiao Yunlong's tall body had already bent down. He did not speak, just stood there quietly. Seeing that Wu Chengyue's expression was not very good, Lu Tianyi and the others also became anxious and quickly shouted, "Leader, Miss Lingling is fine. She was with us just now. Calm down first." And Lu Jing could not care so much at this time. He suddenly shouted to the sky, "Big sister. Don't hide, come out quickly." Hearing Lu Tianyi's words, Wu Chengyue originally did not listen. Needless to say, Xiao Yunlong's mind was completely wrapped in the scene of the car accident between Wu Yueling and Meng Yu. He completely could not listen to the words of others around him. But Lu Jing's shout made Wu Chengyue come back to his senses. He looked blankly at Lu Tianyi and the others. Lu Tianyi took a step forward and said, "Calm down first and listen to me. Miss Lingling is fine now. We just saw her not long ago." "That's right, she was indeed brought here by a zombie king. However, before it could do anything to Miss Lingling, someone had already saved her from the zombie king's clutches. So don't get excited. Wu Chongyue stared at him in disbelief. What did you say? Kong Qingming opened his mouth to help. Yes, it's the person who disappeared just now. You also saw that she has a space ability, and now Miss Lingling is staying in her space. So you have to calm down first, then you can let Miss Lingling come out. At this time Xiao Yunlong also reacted. He also turned his head to look at Kong Qingming blankly, and Lin Xiao, seeing that they were almost done talking, flashed to the opposite building. Then she appeared, standing on the fence at the edge of the roof. As soon as she appeared, everyone's eyes immediately focused on her. As soon as Wu Chongyue saw Lin Xiao appear, his body subconsciously moved, but Lu Qianni's words made him stop. Wait a minute, leader, you better not go over now. Otherwise, she will immediately turn around and enter the space. Wu Chongyue's body stiffened, and he anxiously said, What about Lingling? Is Lingling in your hands? Lin Xiao directly rolled her eyes, although it was blocked by her glasses. What do you mean in her hands? She wasn't the one who caught her, okay? Don't say it like she was the murderer. Chapter 226. Lin Xiao glanced at him and felt that this man was really worried about his daughter. She flashed and entered the space. Exclamation point. Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly disappear, Wu Chongyue immediately became anxious. His face darkened. He fiercely turned his head and stared at Lu Qianni and the others. Lu Qianni and the others were immediately frightened. They all carefully took a step back. Before Wu Chongyue could make any move, Lin Xiao appeared again. But she was holding Xiao Budian in her arms, and Xiao Budian was holding the gray rabbit. Everyone turned their heads and saw her coming out with Xiao Budian. Lu Qianni and the others breathed a sigh of relief, because they no longer had to continue to bear the pressure of their leader. Wu Chongyue and Xiao Yunlong both stared with wide eyes, especially Wu Chongyue, who suddenly flashed and instantly rushed towards Lin Xiao. But Lin Xiao's reaction was a little faster than him. At the same time as he moved, she also moved. Then both of them flashed at the same time, and the next second they both changed positions. Wu Chongyue went to Lin Xiao's original place, but Lin Xiao went to the other side with Xiao Budian. Stop! Give Lingling back to me! Not expecting Lin Xiao to run, Wu Chongyue immediately became angry. He frowned and shouted. But as soon as he finished speaking, he saw Lin Xiao shake her head at him. You! What do you mean? Wu Chongyue narrowed his eyes, then stared at Lin Xiao with a sullen face. This woman? Well, except for that big chest, he really couldn't see where she was a woman. She wore a hat on her head and sunglasses on her face. He couldn't see all the facial features on her face, except for her nose, lips and chin. Not to mention that she snatched his level 6 corpse nucleus. Now she snatched his daughter. What did this woman want to do? Seeing that Lin Xiao still didn't intend to return Lingling to him, Wu Chongyue was really angry. His handsome face was cold and his eyes were fixed on Lin Xiao. At the same time, a purple lightning appeared in his hand. Lin Xiao also frowned. Why was this man so easily angered? He was the leader of a base, but he couldn't even calm down in this matter. He looked like he was ready to fight at the slightest provocation. Was he really a leader? The moment he saw Lingling appear, Xiao Yunlong quickly put Meng Yu down, put her against the wall inside the staircase. Then he flashed to the other side of Lin Xiao and formed a pincer attack with Wu Chongyue. When Lu Qianni and the others saw the situation, they knew it was not good. Wait! Lu Qianni hurriedly braced himself to step forward and shouted, Well, let's talk about it. Before we get to the bottom of things, it's not good for you guys to act like this. Kong Qingming also stepped forward to dissuade her. That's right, our big sister did indeed save Miss Lingling. If it wasn't for her, Miss Lingling would still be in the hands of the level 6 zombie. Shouldn't you be thanking her? As soon as he said this, Xiao Yunlong's expression loosened a little. He looked at Wu Chongyue and opened his mouth to say something. But at this time Wu Chongyue coldly said, If she didn't steal my corpse core, then maybe I would thank her properly. Kong Qingming said, Oh no, even if she stole your things before, it's not right. But now that she has saved your daughter, it can be considered as compensation to you. Isn't it better to let this matter go? Wu Chongyue actually didn't want to hold on to the corpse core, but the other party had quietly stolen his things halfway. He couldn't forgive this kind of behavior. If he hadn't seen that Lingling was still on her side, he would have been struck by several lightning bolts. But this was a different matter. If she really saved Lingling, he would thank her properly. But she stole his things, this account must be settled. He coldly said, if she returns Lingling to me now, I will agree to any request. But she stole my things, this has to be counted separately. At this time Xiao Yunlong said, Chongyue, wait a minute, I think he's right. You calm down first. Lingling before was indeed taken away by a strange level 6 zombie. Although I don't know why the zombie didn't do anything to Lingling, and Lingling could be rescued in time. This matter she helped us. That's great. He thought that he would have to live in the shadow of not being able to protect his goddaughter, and letting his friends down for the rest of his life. He didn't expect Lingling to be rescued. So no matter what, this woman with an unknown identity and appearance was indeed a benefactor to them. Wu Chongyue just looked at him coldly and didn't say anything. At this time Lin Xiao sighed. She squatted down and put Wu Yueling down. Then she looked at her and pointed to Wu Chongyue. Wu Yueling knew that Lin Xiao wanted her to go to her father's side, but she pulled Lin Xiao's clothes reluctantly. Lin Xiao thought she was reluctant to part with her, but after gently grabbing her little hand, she felt a thought. I can still come and play with little man Lin Xiao. So the feelings were not for her but for little man. It seemed that little man could play with her quite well. Lingling, come to daddy's side. Seeing his daughter's reaction, Wu Qingyue's heart tightened. He didn't know why he suddenly felt that his daughter was about to be taken away. Hearing Wu Qingyue's call, Wu Yueling let go of Lin Xiao's hand and turned to walk towards Wu Chongyue. As she walked, she looked back. At this time, the rabbit in her arms jumped down like the last time, then stopped on the ground and looked up at Wu Yueling, and then bounced towards Lin Xiao. And little Buddy and looked at the gray rabbit leaving her again, and was immediately at a loss of what to do. Seeing that his daughter had just taken 2 steps towards him, and then stopped again, Wu Chongyue was a little anxious. He immediately flashed to his daughter's side. He held her in his arms. At the same time, a bolt of lightning as thick as an arm descended from the sky, blasting towards Lin Xiao. Fuck! Lin Xiao suddenly cursed in his heart, and at the same time, he reacted quickly and somersaulted backwards, and then flipped back to his original position. At this time, Wu Chongyue had already carried Lingling to Xiao Yunlong's side. The others, including Xiao Yunlong, looked at Wu Chongyue with a dumbfounded expression. Motherfucker, he really did it. Without saying a word, he struck his benefactor with a bolt of lightning. That's too, not nice, isn't it? But thinking about it again, when Lin Xiao snatched his corpse core, it seemed to be quite unkind. Wu Chongyue was holding Wu Yueling, and was about to carefully examine her body to see if there was anything strange. Who knew that when he turned his head, he saw his daughter's big tearful eyes, staring at him with a very resentful look. Woo, why did you hit zombie sister? You hit zombie sister again. Although Wu Chongyue did not know his daughter's thoughts at this time, he could still see that his daughter was unhappy because he had just attacked that strange woman. Wu Chongyue. His daughter was actually siding with the other party? The other party had only been 2 or 3 days. What kind of drug did he give his daughter? Chapter 227. On the other side, Lin Xiao was also angry. Damn it, he actually sneak attacked me when I came to pick up my daughter. If you want to fight, can't you fight fair and square? Just because you have a high level of ability, you can casually attack others like this? Alright, even though he had stolen his corpse core before, he was still a corpse core. This can be considered as giving him a taste of his own medicine. She admitted it. However, you want to fight, right? If you have the ability, don't use your ability. Can you fight with your bare fists? She suddenly hooked her hand at Lu Tianyi, asking him to come over. Lu Tianyi was looking at her and saw her hooking her hand at him. He walked over curiously. As soon as he walked over, he saw Lin Xiao take out her special writing board and write a sentence on it. Let him fight with his bare fists if he has the ability. After Lin Xiao finished writing, she raised it in front of him, and then saw Lu Tianyi's face become strange. Bare fists? Lu Tianyi looked at Lin Xiao strangely. then turned to look at Wu Changyue. Then he turned back and asked Lin Xiao, "Are you sure?" Lin Xiao gave him a light kick on his calf. "What nonsense!" Lu Tianyi said. "Don't you know that he has practiced fighting before? Why looking for abuse?" Lin Xiao raised her foot again to kick. "If he has practiced, then so be it. Hasn't she practiced before?" It seems that Lu Tianyi has not practiced before. Seeing that she raised her foot again, Lu Tianyi dodged to the side. Then he turned his head and shouted at Wu Changyue. "That leader. She said that if you want to fight with her, it's fine. But neither side can use their abilities. You have to fight with your bare fists." After that, he quickly turned his head and asked Lin Xiao, "Isn't that right?" Lin Xiao just glanced at him without nodding or shaking her head. But she put away the writing board, then put her hands in her trouser pockets and raised her chin at Wu Changyue. Wu Changyue was a little unhappy that his daughter ran away with a stranger in just 2 or 3 days. His daughter was a very introverted and autistic child. Even the acquaintances around her didn't give face. Now she actually gave face to a person she had just known for less than 3 days, which made him very sour in his heart. He touched his daughter's head and saw that there was nothing wrong with her. He turned his head and smiled faintly at Lin Xiao before standing up. "Fine, if you have the ability, don't hide in this space. I don't need my arcana, since you have the guts to steal my corpse core. Are you afraid that I will strike you with lightning?" At this time, Wu Yueling suddenly hugged Wu Changyue's thigh and looked up at him with a frown. Wu Changyue lowered his head and realized that his daughter was taking the initiative today. "But why are you always partial to others?" Standing there, he stroked her head and said, "Good girl, let go of Daddy. Daddy won't kill her. Daddy is making friends with her." When Wu Yueling heard that her father said that they were just friends, she felt a little relieved. But she still looked at her father in confusion. Why did they have to fight to make friends? Xiao Yunlong came over and crouched behind Wu Yueling, pulling her hand. "Children do not understand. This is the way adults make friends. Come, you and Godfather can watch from the side. Let's go take care of your sister, you." As he spoke, he carried Wu Yueling in the direction of the stairs. When he reached the door, he suddenly turned his head to Lin Xiao and said, Thank you for saving Lingling this time. I owe you a favor. Next time if there's anything, I'll help you. Next time you can come to the base to find me. I will try my best to help you." Lin Xiao glanced at him and nodded politely. It was a response. Xiao Yunlong looked back at Wu Changyue again and then walked in. Wu Changyue knew the meaning of Xiao Yunlong's glance. He was telling him not to be too heavy-handed. After all, although she stole his corpse core, she also saved his daughter's life. Of course he knew. If it wasn't for this strange woman who saved Lingling, would he be able to talk to her so calmly here? He would have already struck her with lightning one by one, okay? When Lu Tianyi saw this scene, he looked at Lin Xiao with some worry. He always felt that Lin Xiao's request was like asking for abuse. He really didn't want to die. But he didn't say much, just took a step forward and said, Now the rest of us here will be the judges. Can you start?" Lin Xiao came over and stood in the middle of the rooftop platform. He left the other end for Wu Changyue. Wu Changyue recovered his smiling expression at this time and walked over leisurely. He stood 3 meters away from Lin Xiao. The others immediately widened their eyes, their faces full of excitement. They didn't expect it to become like this. There was a good show to watch. Everyone wished they could take a bench and sit down with melon seeds and peanuts. Well, if there were no benches, they could just find dry ground to sit on. Then, because of the previous rain, the rooftop platform was wet. So everyone squeezed to the stairwell. Then they sat down in rows against the wall. "Big sister, will this work? The leader has practiced all kinds of fighting skills." Lu Jing turned his head and looked at Lin Xiao worriedly. Zheng Xiaonian shook his head and said, "I don't know. We are not familiar with Big Sister." Huang Shou said, "Alas, let's wait and see. Won't we know when they start fighting? I hope the leader can be merciful. You should be more polite to a lady." "Lady?" The others looked at Lin Xiao's current appearance. Cough. Cough. Lu Jing coughed lightly and then said in a low voice, "Look at Big Sister now. How does she look like a woman? If she takes off the clothes tied to her shoulders, she might look a little more like one." Kong Qingming said silently, "Say, what do you think she will look like if she takes off her hat?" Will it be a hairstyle shorter than a man's? The others. Does look a little like her. There is no hair at the edge of the hat. Did she hand over the edge? In everyone's mind they put such a hairstyle on Lin Xiao's head. And then they felt a little strange. Big sister, can you look a little more like a woman? Xiedong looked at these people speechlessly. Hey, is this the time to care about this? Wu Changyue stood opposite Lin Xiao and looked at her and said, although I don't quite understand why you haven't spoken since just now, shouldn't you at least introduce yourself? Lin Xiao directly rolled her eyes. So much nonsense. Do you want to fight or not? She didn't speak. She just took 2 steps forward and then put her feet one in front and one behind. She raised her hands to her chest and clenched her fists, staring at Wu Changyue. Seeing that Lin Xiao had already made a posture, Wu Changyue didn't speak anymore. He made the same posture as Lin Xiao. When everyone saw Lin Xiao's posture, they were immediately surprised. Oh, big sister really knows how to fight. Chapter 228. Whether she knew how to fight or not as long as she posed. Those who knew could basically see it. Everyone knew it when they saw Lin Xiao's pose. Wow, there's a chance. Everyone became spirited and stared at the two of them expectantly. Lu Tianyi saw Lin Xiao's aura coming out so quickly and looked at her in surprise. But he didn't forget to take a few steps back. Wu Changyue didn't care that Lin Xiao didn't reply to him. He just smiled and said softly, I'm sorry, I don't fight women. But since you want to have a fight, I'll keep you company. But since it's a fight, the winner will be the one who knocks off the opponent's hat. As he spoke, he took off the ordinary military training cap that had been pinned to the side of his waist and put it on his head. Lin Xiao just stared at him without moving and didn't give him any reaction. The two of them faced each other in silence for a few seconds. Wu Changyue didn't move first, and neither did Lin Xiao. Although the two of them didn't move, the people around them unconsciously became nervous. The two of them wore hats of similar style, but Wu Changyue's was camouflage. Lin Xiao's hat was black. So, if one of them knocked off the opponent's hat, it would be considered a win. Then it would be considered a win. Wu Changyue and Lin Xiao both posed in an offensive and defensive posture. Neither of them made the first move to gain the initiative. But the more they did so, the more time passed. Everyone's hearts were in their throats. Hurry! Fight, fight! Suddenly, a small voice came out. The others all turned their heads and looked at that person. I'm in a hurry. That person suddenly said what was in his heart and regretted it. Seeing that everyone was staring at him, he couldn't help but whisper awkwardly. Only then did the others turn their attention to the two who were facing each other. Lin Xiao suddenly moved. She rushed forward and raised her leg to kick at Wu Changyue. Her movement was very fast and powerful. Her long leg drew a slight wind sound in the air. Puff! Wu Changyue followed Lin Xiao's movement. Although Lin Xiao's movement was very fast, Wu Changyue's reaction was not slow either. When Lin Xiao's kick came, Wu Changyue also took a step forward. He raised his leg sideways and kicked toward the back of Lin Xiao's calf. He easily blocked Lin Xiao's side kick. Then Wu Changyue blocked Lin Xiao's leg, blocking Lin Xiao's leg. Suddenly he launched an upward kick toward the front of Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao quickly retracted his leg and leaned to the side, crossing his arms to block the attack. He immediately blocked Wu Changyue's long leg, and then instantly punched at Wu Changyue's face. Wu Changyue was 1.8 meters tall and had long legs, but he was also very agile. Seeing that Lin Xiao was about to hit his face, he raised his fist in time and blocked Lin Xiao's attack with his forearm. He threw a punch at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao blocked his fist. Just as his opponent retracted his leg, he suddenly jumped and kicked his opponent's abdomen. As soon as the two of them started fighting, they immediately exchanged a few blows. But neither of them got the upper hand because they both blocked each other's moves. At the same time, they could continue to find their opponent's weak spots and attack again. Wu Changyue and Lin Xiao exchanged a few blows. They did not feel anything. But the people next to them felt a little dizzy. Because weren't the two of them a little too fast? In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already changed positions. At this time Lin Xiao suddenly seized the opportunity and clasped the wrist of Wu Changyue's fist, then pulled it back tightly. At the same time, her knee rushed toward his opponent's abdomen. Wu Qingyue's eyes darkened and he had a bad feeling. He quickly pulled in his abdomen and turned sideways. But his arm was twisted by Lin Xiao with great force. Then, his body was pressed to the ground by the force of his arm. Why is this woman's strength stronger than a man's? He could not help but curse in his heart. After Lin Xiao's knee missed, she grabbed his arm with both hands and pulled it down. The tip of her elbow joint rushed toward his face. Wu Qingyue quickly raised his other hand to block the tip of her elbow joint. Then he turned his foot. Just under Lin Xiao's foot, he pulled his hand back forcefully. He suddenly threw Lin Xiao to the side. Lin Xiao was thrown away by him. If she was an ordinary person, she would have been thrown away. But she did not. Instead, she grabbed his hand tightly and turned her body nimbly in midair. Unexpectedly, she nimbly hooked one of her legs around his neck and then cut her legs. She pulled his upper body and fell backward. With a loud thud, the two of them fell onto the concrete floor. Ouch! It hurts. The surrounding people were shocked by the way the two of them fell to the ground. Wu Qingyue groaned. Then, he realized that his upper body was being controlled. And when his head was loosened, the hat was gone. The hand that was grabbed by the other party was pulled up. The other party clamped his hand tightly and did not loosen her grip at all. Her legs went from his neck to his chest with great force, and then she crossed her legs and clamped his upper body tightly. That was not all. At this time, Lin Xiao suddenly twisted his arm backward. Ah fuck! Ugh! Wu Qingyue could not help but howl. The pain made his face red and the blue veins on his forehead popped out. All the blood in his body rushed to his brain. For a moment he did not have a rational reaction. Wu Qingyue clenched his teeth so hard that his cheeks bulged out, but he still clenched his fists. He did not let go of his mouth, nor did he struggle with his legs. Instead he stared at Lin Xiao's thigh that was clamped from his neck to his chest. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and bit down with his white teeth. Roar! Lin Xiao was about to let go of him. Anyway, the hat had been taken off and she had one. But she did not expect that before she could react, the sensitive and tender flesh on the inside of her thigh was suddenly bitten. Stimulated by the sudden strange pain, Lin Xiao raised her head and roared. As she raised her head, she immediately swung Wu Qingyue's arm backward. Then this movement immediately made Wu Qingyue miserable. It was so painful. Wu Qingyue did not let go of her despite the pain. Instead he reacted quickly and bit her again. Then it was Lin Xiao's turn to be miserable. Fuck! Lin Xiao, who had been slow to speak, could not help but curse. And the others beside them were already laughing uncontrollably. Wu Qingyue's joints were in pain from Lin Xiao's twisting, and Lin Xiao was bitten tightly by Wu Qingyue. What were these two trying to do? Could they fight properly? Also, you a man have already lost. Why did you bite the lady's thigh? Chapter 229. Lin Xiao didn't expect her body to recover its sense of pain, and it even felt like the pain was magnified. Was it an illusion? Or was this man's teeth too good? Why was he biting so hard? And Lin Xiao was too depressed right now. It was fine if she was bitten. But she was bitten by a big man, and he even bit her inner thigh. How could she cry out molestation? On her thigh where she was bitten, there was a sharp stinging pain. There was even a kind of numbing feeling. Fuck fuck fuck. Lin Xiao quickly let go of his arm. Let go. Mouth. She gritted her teeth and let go of her leg, then sat up and used her hand to choke his neck. Wu Qingyue loosened his grip, and only then did he loosen his mouth. Then he pulled away her hand that was strangling his neck and rolled to stand up. Ba ba ba. He spat as he supported the arm that was twisted by Lin Xiao to the back. Lin Xiao rubbed the bite mark on her leg and stared at him fiercely. And the others were amused by their final posture. But they didn't realize that Lin Xiao's cry of pain was different from a normal person's. When they were fighting, it was a normal fight between experts, but they didn't expect Wu Qingyue to be restrained by Lin Xiao so quickly. Both of them were fighting hand to hand. In terms of strength, a man should be a bit stronger. But Lin Xiao was much more flexible than Wu Qingyue. So in the end, she was restrained by Lin Xiao's quick and tricky movements. This was considered normal. But they didn't expect that a fight between adults would suddenly turn into a fight between children. Especially when the one biting was a man like Wu Changyue. If it was Lin Xiao who was a woman who bit, perhaps they wouldn't be so surprised. Lin Xiao stood up. Her clothes were messed up from the fight just now. The clothes that were tied to the shoulders were now all turned to the front. The clothes on her waist were also rolled up a bit. She rubbed the bite mark on her leg, then pointed her finger at Wu Changyue. She gritted her teeth and said, "You bite people." At this moment her heart was about to collapse. What the fuck? She was the zombie, okay? She didn't even move her mouth, but this man dared to bite her. Fortunately, he didn't bite through her skin and drink her blood. Otherwise, he would have turned into a zombie. That wasn't what she was worried about. She was the one who was the zombie, okay? Why was she the one being bitten? Wu Changyue finally realized what he had just done. His face immediately turned red. Then, he clenched his hand into a fist and coughed lightly. He turned his face to the other side. Holy shit. How embarrassing. How could he be hot-headed and not bite? It's not a dog. It was so awkward now. Poochie poochie, a few sounds the few people who were still trying their best to endure. After hearing Lin Xiao's words, he couldn't hold it in anymore. All of them burst out laughing. Lu Tianyi also recovered from his bewilderment. Then, like Wu Changyue, he clenched his fist and put it to his mouth. He said with a forced smile, "Cough, Chief. You've lost. Your hat has fallen off." As he spoke, he pointed at the hat at Lin Xiao's feet. Wu Changyue turned around and walked towards the direction of the stairs. "I've lost. I'll look into the matter of the zombie core." Lin Xiao stared at his back and silently wondered if she should rush over and give him a bite on his neck. Lu Tianyi looked at Lin Xiao's expression and suddenly guessed what she was thinking. He quickly ran to her side and picked up his leader's hat. You twisting his joints was enough to make him suffer. Don't mind it, but when did you become so powerful? Don't tell me. Was it because you became a zombie that you became so powerful? Lin Xiao glanced at him. Her speed and reaction were indeed closely related to turning into a zombie, but her moves were all developed in the army. Not many people could escape from 5 moves of her fighting technique. But now her strength, speed, and reaction had greatly increased by several levels. This man could still fight with her for so long, it was already very good. But why did he bite her? Fuck. He couldn't win, so he used his teeth to bite? Was he born in the year of the dog? Moreover, after biting her, he just threw a sentence and was ready to leave? Didn't he even apologize? Not knowing if it was because he sensed Lin Xiao's thoughts, Wu Changyue suddenly stopped halfway. Then he slightly turned his head and softly said, "Well, just now. Sorry. And thank you for saving Lingling." After that, he continued to walk towards Xiao Yunlong and Wu Yueling. The others immediately stood up one after another and followed him. "Leader, can you guys go with you?" Kong Qingming asked Wu Changyue, who was walking to the stairwell. Wu Changyue smiled and said to them, "Yes." Then he turned to Xiao Yunlong and asked, "How is Meng Yu's situation? Is she okay? If it's serious, send her back to the base first." Xiao Yunlong said, She just didn't eat for 2 days. Then she fainted because her physical strength couldn't support it. The injury isn't very serious, but she lost a lot of blood." On this side, after Lu Tianyi heard Kong Qingming asking Wu Changyue, he knew he should go. But he still had a question to ask Lin Xiao. Where can I find you in the future? Will you still be in East China?" Lin Xiao retracted her eyes that had been angrily staring at Wu Changyue's back, turned her head and said, "Fate allows us to meet." She didn't say that she might stay in this area in the future, but at that time she would definitely be with Lin Feng and the others. Lu Tianyi looked at her unwillingly and waited for a few seconds for Lin Xiao's next words. He sighed and turned to walk towards Wu Changyue and the others. When the others saw that they were about to leave, they all turned their heads and shouted to Lin Xiao, "By the way, big sister, do you want to go back to the base with us?" Kong Qingming said to them angrily, "Did you forget that she had something to do? It was all because of us that she was delayed." Oh! Only then did everyone realize that there seemed to be such a thing. At this time, Zheng Xiaonian shouted again, "By the way, what's your name, big sister? We still don't know your name." Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming both looked at Lin Xiao strangely. Wu Chongyue and Xiao Yunlong also looked at Lin Xiao curiously, wondering what name she would say. Was it someone they had heard of before? Lin Xiao just glanced at them lightly and said one word, Lin. Her voice was a little low, so Zheng Xiaonian and the others couldn't hear it very clearly. Then they asked each other, hey? What did Big Sister just say? Did you hear it clearly? I didn't hear it clearly. Wu Chongyue said at this time she said the word Lin. Lin. Chapter 230. Lu Tianyi, who was still standing next to Lin Xiao, looked at Lin Xiao strangely, but then he thought that her identity was different now. In the past, everyone thought that Lu Tianyi was dead, so now that she had changed her name, she wanted to change her identity. After looking at Lin Xiao a few more times, Lu Tianyi turned around and followed behind everyone. Xiadong walked over with the gray rabbit and threw it to her. Lin Xiao took the rabbit and threw it into her space, then walked to the fence at the edge and sat on it with both hands. Then she turned around and put both her legs out of the building. She rubbed the inside of her leg where Wu Chongyue had bitten her. She was in a daze. What the hell, wasn't it too strange for a man to bite someone? And as a zombie, she could still feel pain from being bitten. Was this the situation after little man healed her body? She could make a sound and the pain also came back. And there seemed to be an amplification effect. What the hell was this? She was a zombie, okay? Being bitten hurt like this. If she was hit in a fight in the future, she would die of pain. She suddenly felt that it was good when she didn't feel anything. This was not good. Xiadong stood next to her, took out a small notebook and wrote, "You seem to be in a lot of pain." Then he stretched out his hand in front of Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao turned her head and looked at it, then took off her sunglasses. She raised it in front of her body and wiped it with her clothes. While wiping, she said, "Very painful." "What do you mean it was already very painful?" She wiped off the dust on the sunglasses and was about to put it on her face. Suddenly, her hand stopped and she turned her head. Her sharp eyes looked towards the other side of the rooftop platform. Xiadong noticed her gaze and also looked over there. But he didn't see anything. He looked back at Lin Xiao in confusion, not knowing what she saw. Lin Xiao stared in that direction, then turned her body back and jumped down from the fence. She stared coldly over there and said two words, "Come out." Xiadong couldn't see it, but Lin Xiao could see it with her eyes slightly closed. There was a green energy body standing there motionless. When she was about to put on her sunglasses, she closed her eyes slightly. However, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a ball of green energy. Lin Xiao's reaction immediately alerted Xiadong. The two of them stared at each other quietly. Xiadong's eyes wandered around to find what Lin Xiao was looking at. But Lin Xiao stared fixedly at that spot. Perhaps because it felt that it had been discovered, the green energy finally revealed itself. A female zombie with half of her face covered in scales slowly appeared from the void. She glared at Lin Xiao angrily. Suddenly, she bared her teeth and roared at Lin Xiao, "Ah! It's you! You stole my little sister away!" Lin Xiao and Xiadong were speechless. Yes, a conscious zombie king. But when did Wu Yueling become your little sister? She had a father, okay? Furthermore, you were the one who had stolen her child. Yet you dared to accuse her of stealing her little sister? Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "His family. If you snatch her away, her family will be worried. What you did was wrong." The female zombie suddenly froze. Then she angrily stared at Lin Xiao and roared, "Ah! But she's very cute. I like her a lot." Lin Xiao raised her eyebrows and looked at the female zombie in confusion. Why did she feel that this child's IQ was a bit low? No matter how cute little Ling Ling was, she's not yours. It's fine if you like her, but you can't forcefully take her away. She patiently said to the zombie girl, but can't take her home by force." The female zombie snorted and roared, "Ah! I like her, why can't I forcefully take her away? It's just that it's not fun to be alone, so I want her to play with me. And I clearly didn't hurt her, yet you all seem to think that I would." Lin Xiao nodded. She believed her words. Because when she first saw her and Xiao Budian together, this girl zombie's behavior was very careful, as if she was treating some cherished toy. But she pointed at her own face and said to the female zombie, because you don't look like a good person or a zombie." The female zombie immediately refused and roared, "Ah! I don't know what a zombie is, but I know I look ugly like this. But I don't know why I became like this. I've always been like this. I don't even remember who I am. I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. I just want little sister, I just want Lin Xiao. Was she acting like a spoiled child? She turned her head and looked at Xie Dong. The female zombie who Lin Xiao thought was acting like a spoiled child suddenly changed her expression and stared at Lin Xiao coldly. Then she roared in a low voice, "Ah, I don't care, I want you to take me to find little sister. Otherwise, I'll bite you to death." Lin Xiao. What happened to acting like a spoiled child? How did it become a threat in the blink of an eye? Why? Don't. Go. Find yourself? Lin Xiao was speechless. The zombie girl crossed her arms in front of her chest, then snorted, "Humph, ah." Because they don't seem to want to kill you. If I go, I will definitely be killed by the person who fought with you. Lin Xiao was suddenly enlightened. Oh, so this guy is afraid of a level 7 arcanist. It should be her intuition as a rank 6 zombie king that warned her not to get close to a rank 7 metahuman. However, it turned out that she also had an invisibility skill. Although he did not dare to approach her in the open, he was not afraid of her in the dark. Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, "I don't have time." She didn't have time to care about this guy's business. Since she knew how to turn invisible, so did he. If worst comes to worst, I'll just hide in the space. Could it be that he was afraid of this fellow? Although it was true that she couldn't win in a head-on fight, she wasn't afraid. Hearing Lin Xiao's refusal, the zombie girl immediately became angry. It bared its teeth at Lin Xiao's vertical eye and roared furiously, "Roar! Aren't you afraid I'll hit you?" Lin Xiao turned around and suddenly pulled Xie Dong to dodge. Seeing Lin Xiao turn around, the zombie girl also moved. She fiercely rushed over. Her speed was extremely fast, like a bolt of lightning. But when she rushed to Lin Xiao's position, she pounced on empty air. Lin Xiao and Xie Dong had already disappeared. She was stunned and then looked left and right in panic. She found that Lin Xiao had disappeared into thin air in this area. "Roar! I will definitely find you again." The zombie girl somewhat unwillingly roared. Chapter 231. After Lin Xiao entered the space, she let go of Xie Dong, closed her eyes and flashed out. She went out invisibly. Hearing the girl zombie's unwilling and willful roar, she just smiled faintly. Then she turned and jumped down the stairs, leaving. It was time for her to get down to business. Her pace had been disrupted by Lu Tianyi, Tiny Tot, and the others. She didn't even have time to look for information about resources. On the other side, Lu Tianyi led the crowd forward. He asked Xiao Yunlong as he walked, "How did you meet the king zombie? What kind of ability is it?" The others also looked curiously at Xiao Yunlong, who was carrying Mengyu, not knowing how he let the other party snatch the little princess away. Xiao Yunlong said, "It came to us, even Mengyu didn't sense it. By the time we found out, it was already at the door of our room, although we jumped out of the window in time. But its movement was very fast, and it came and went like a ghost. We didn't drive far when it suddenly overturned us. At that time Mengyu and Xiao Budian were in the car. By the time I rushed over, there was only Mengyu left in the car." Speaking of this, he hung his head in a low voice. Wu Chengyue held his daughter and touched her back. He felt that the energy in his daughter's body seemed to be about to reach a breakthrough point. He didn't know if her ability was going to be awakened. He turned to look at Lu Tianyi and the others, asking, "That woman, how did you meet my Lingling and the king zombie? You even dared to snatch Lingling back from its hands. How did you do it?" Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming smiled and replied, "It wasn't us, it was just her." Wu Chengyue and Xiao Yunlong looked at them strangely, waiting for their next words. Kong Qingming said, "She has a space. We were in another place half a month ago, but then we were caught by a group of level 5 zombies and were driven to the upper city. Then she suddenly appeared and saved all of us. Later we all stayed in her space to recuperate. When she brought Miss Lingling in, we didn't know what happened." Wu Chengyue and Xiao Yunlong looked at each other after hearing his answer, and then turned to look at Lingling. He let out a sigh of relief and said, "Luckily that zombie king didn't have time to hurt Lingling, or else." Xiao Yunlong said to him, "What are your plans now? Your corpse core seems to have been stolen. Should I go look for the second zombie king?" But you're really narrow-minded. He helped us save Lingling. You're still haggling over such a small matter. Exchanging a corpse core for your daughter's life isn't too much, right? Although their conversation on the roof made Xiao Yunlong somewhat confused, he still knew an important thing. It was the woman who had been bitten by Wu Changyue who had stolen his corpse core. The reason why Wu Changyue was so angry was because she had stolen the lightning core. The others nodded in agreement. And she didn't expect that this man, who usually looked easy to talk to and gentle, was so narrow-minded. Wu Changyue glanced at him with a faint smile and said, "Is this your first day knowing me? Besides, haven't I already let her go? And I also thank her. If there's anything in the future, I will also help." Xiao Yunlong rolled his eyes at him and said, "You bit her and you still have the nerve to say that. It's fine if you can't win, but you actually bit people. You really did it." Wu Changyue cast him a sidelong glance and said with a smile, "What did you say? I didn't hear it clearly." Xiao Yunlong immediately turned his face to the side, looking at the wall and said, "You're a stingy person, you've always been. Don't deny it." The others looked at Wu Changyue in surprise. They felt that they had learned something incredible. Would they be silenced in a moment? The smile on Wu Changyue's face faded a little, saying, "Yes, I'm stingy. What's wrong? Hurry back to the encampment. Meng Yu's situation is not very good. Why did you run in with her?" Xiao Yunlong looked back at Meng Yu on his back and said, "We originally wanted to tell you about Lingling, but we didn't expect it to rain. And we don't know if the zombie king at the encampment will go back." Wu Changyue glanced at him and did not speak. But his mind suddenly emerged the rabbit that just jumped out of Lingling's arms. Why did it seem a little familiar? Why didn't it kill and eat that rabbit? And it could still leisurely raise it. Women really couldn't understand. On the other side, Lin Xiao spent a few days searching the entire Westlake district. She found the location of the planning bureau. Then the female zombie girl also looked everywhere for Lin Xiao's figure. But after Lin Xiao turned invisible, no one could find her, at least for now. Lin Xiao found a lot of maps in the planning bureau's information room, all kinds of them. With these maps, she had a much clearer picture of the geographical location of Hangzhou. Then she went to find a lot of storage warehouses according to the marks on the map. Rice, flour, oil and salt were well stored. Except for 30% of them that were spoiled, there was still a lot that could be eaten. Lin Xiao put a lot of rice, salt, and some vacuum-sealed food into the space. Everything was settled, and the terrain and formations were almost all checked out. But the zombie king was a little troublesome, so she could let Xiao Lily deal with it. Lin Xiao found a car that could be driven from a car dealership and started to drive back. The next day, she rushed back to the hotel where Lin Feng and the others were. When Lin Xiao drove the car within 500 meters of the hotel, she found a large number of zombies gathered at the intersection. After she released her breath, those zombies immediately hid in disorder and made a passage in the middle of the road. But they didn't seem to want to leave. When Lin Xiao passed, they all blocked the way back. Lin Xiao stopped after driving past the zombie wall and stretched out her head to see that those zombies were all facing the direction outside, or walking back and forth in the same place. Maybe Qiu Lily had given them some instructions. Lin Xiao withdrew her head and continued to drive the car to the hotel. In front of the hotel, she heard the sound of a car parked, and two children were playing. "Tong Tong, here, ha ha ha. Come and catch me." Lin Xiaolu's bell-like laughter rang out. The two children chased each other in the spacious parking lot. And don't run, Tong Tong's voice chased her from behind, shouting unwillingly. Cheng Wangxue and Junjun sat on the edge of the flower bed, watching the two children, and chatting with Junjun. "You don't remember anything. If you suddenly meet the man who abandoned you, will you still remember him? Do you still think of him?" Cheng Wangxue asked. Chapter 232. Junjun looked at her in confusion and wrote in the notebook, "How do you know that he abandoned us? Maybe he's dead, or turned into a zombie." Cheng Wangxue looked at her and then at Tong Tong. She said, "My intuition is very accurate. If he didn't abandon us, why were you and Tong Tong the only ones left in that place? If Lu Qianyu hadn't passed by, you and Tong Tong might still have been locked up in the building. You said that the door downstairs was locked. Do you think you locked it yourself or someone else?" Then she looked at Junjun. Junjun frowned, then shook her head and wrote, I remember that the lock was locked from the outside, so I didn't know how to open it. I don't remember anything else. She paused and then wrote, maybe you're right. But if I really met him, I don't know if I could recognize him. Because I don't remember what happened before. Cheng Wangshua looked at her face and said, it doesn't matter. Tongtong still has you. You're his mother. You'll protect him, right? Junjun nodded and looked lovingly at Tongtong, who was chasing Lin Xiaolu. At this time, Cheng Wangshua pointed to her eyes and said, the dark circles under your eyes are getting smaller and smaller these days, and the color of your eyes is also getting darker. Are you going to upgrade? Junjun touched her eyes and wrote uncertainly, I'm not sure, but I do have a strange feeling. Cheng Wangshua said, the water left by Lu Tianyu is really effective. Even my leg injury has healed very quickly. But we didn't take any medicine. Junjun just smiled at her. She had been soaking in the tank of water left by Lin Xiao every day. Although Lin Xiao said that the water could be poured out after 2 soaking. Then she would put in a new bubble when she came back. But she was a little reluctant, so she soaked for a few days in a row. Of course, before going in. She would scrub her body before going in. After thinking about it, she wrote, you can actually use the lake water to soak your feet. It might heal faster this way. Cheng Wangshua shook her head and said, that won't do. The water of the world is too precious now. How can it be used to soak my feet? Actually, it's still okay here. If you go to the north and northeast, you'll know how precious water is. The environment there is very bad. The outside of the base is full of sandstorms and smog. You have to wear a mask when you go out. Junjun smiled and nodded. At this moment, a white shadow flashed down from the roof and landed beside the two. Qiu Lily said to the two of them, Cheng Wangshua looked at her in confusion, then looked at Junjun and asked, what did she say? Junjun also stood up and wrote, she's back. Who is she? Cheng Wangshua asked hesitantly, but he quickly changed his mind. He thought of a possibility and asked, is Lu Tianyu back? The two of them nodded at her. Not long after, he heard the sound of a car coming from afar. Then he saw a car drive in. The car stopped in the parking space next to them. Then a woman wearing a hat got out. In a flash, Qiu Lily appeared beside Lin Xiao. Aya, how is it? Have you decided on the location? When are we moving there? While walking, Lin Xiao said to her, look good when can go, but pass. Suddenly she stopped, looked at Qiu Lily and said, when the time comes, I still need your help with something. Qiu Lily also stopped and listened to her with a confused expression. Then she looked at her in confusion. What help? Lin Xiao said there is zombie level with Qiu Lily covered her forehead. After she finished speaking, she finally couldn't help but burst out, when can you speak at a normal speed? It's so painful to hear. Lin Xiao smiled awkwardly and said, very soon. Qiu Lily looked at her gloomily. At this time, Junjun and Cheng Wangshua also looked very confused. There was nothing they could do. The way Lin Xiao spoke really tested their patience. Lin Xiao walked into the hotel lobby, and the others followed behind. After going up to the room upstairs, Lin Xiao returned to Qiu Lily and Junjun's room. She told Cheng Wangshua to go back and tell Lin Feng that they would discuss business the next day. At the same time, Lin Xiao took Xiedong out and returned to their respective rooms. After entering Junjun's room, Lin Xiao closed the door and looked at Junjun. She said, you soon? Junjun nodded. She was indeed about to break through. Lin Xiao nodded and said, first, wait for him to cure this voice. Can you go down there? She said to go down to the lake to cure because little man had absorbed all the energy in the past 2 days and turned it into her own energy. So little man still needed a way to vent, and that was to cure them. Junjun and Qiu Lily knew what she meant, so they nodded. Then they watched Lin Xiao enter the space from the room. After entering the space, Lin Xiao squinted her eyes and looked at the color of the water. It had become a lot darker, and the thick dark green water was rolling in the lake. After seeing Lin Xiao come in, a very thick vine had already emerged from the water. In the past, every time it appeared, it was only as thick as a finger, but now it was as thick as a forearm. The vine swayed on the water, as if it was calling Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao knew that little man was indeed calling her. She stood on the shore of the lake, took off her hat and sunglasses, and took off her coat from her shoulders. After taking off the tank top and trousers, he took off the last piece of underwear. Then she walked barefoot into the water. Her skin was white, and her waist was slender and flexible. Her legs were slender and round, and her chest was plump. Lu Tianyu's body was really good. If her chest could be a little smaller, Lin Xiao thought silently in her heart. After all, having a big chest was very inconvenient for her. She looked down at her thigh, and sure enough, there was a circle of purple-black teeth marks on the inside of the middle of her right leg. That narrow-minded man. Stepping in the water, a cool feeling spread from the skin under her feet. Lin Xiao's body's senses had returned, and she could also feel the temperature. Moreover, she seemed to like to be a little cooler, and couldn't stand being too hot. If it wasn't for a serious mission, she didn't want to endure this burning feeling at all. But if it was a mission, her mentality would be different. After entering the water, little man's branches wrapped around her. She gently pulled her into the water. When Lin Xiao walked to the point where the water level was above her chest, more branches wrapped around her. "Mama, it won't hurt this time, it'll be over soon," little man's voice rang in her mind. Lin Xiao nodded in her heart. "Okay, I'll go out in a while. I'll send Junjun in. Can you help her treat her?" Little man readily agreed. Yes, no problem." Lin Xiao chuckled softly in her heart, and couldn't help but say, "So obedient." Then little man's movements suddenly stopped for a moment, and then she began to twist around. Wow, Mama is praising me. I'm so happy, Lin Xiao." Chapter 233. Gentle energy slowly seeped into her body through her pores, but the energy all gathered towards her abdomen, chest, and head. Lin Xiao didn't feel any pain. She just felt that her abdomen was very hot, and then her brain was a little dizzy. Then she fell asleep unknowingly. The experience this time was completely different from the previous times, and Lin Xiao didn't even know what was going on. When she woke up, she found that she was lying on the bed in the space. It seemed like little man brought her up and put her on the bed. Sitting up from the soft bed, Lin Xiao looked at her abdomen. She found that the color of the film on her abdomen seemed to have darkened, so she pressed it with her hand. She found that there was something soft underneath, and she didn't know what it was. But it still felt different from a normal person's stomach. She looked up at the direction of the lake, and tried to open her mouth to call, "Little man." After calling, she was stunned for a moment, and then raised her hand to touch her throat. She said to herself, "My throat is better?" Hearing Lin Xiao's call, several thick vines immediately emerged from the lake. Then they danced on the water surface, as if responding to her. Lin Xiao looked around and found that her clothes were placed at the foot of the bed. After taking them and putting them on, she walked to the lake. "Thank you, little man." Although she didn't know what kind of creature this vine was, it had helped her heal her body several times. She was still very grateful. Little man stretched out a branch to the lake, and wrapped it around Lin Xiao's foot. "Mama, don't thank me, because only Mama has little man helping. Mama is also helping little man." Lin Xiao squatted down, and used her hand to pick up the branch that was wrapped around her foot. Then she looked at her and asked, "Why do you have to call me Mama? Can't you call me sister?" Little man seemed to be very confused and replied, "Why do I have to call you sister? It was Mama who told me to call you Mama." Lin Xiao was stunned. When did she tell her to call her Mama? "I told you to call me that? When will it be? Why don't I remember?" Little man was silent for a while before replying. It seems like a long time ago." Little man doesn't remember. But little man still remembered some of the words Mama said. Lin Xiao felt even more puzzled. "Some of the things I said?" Little man used the tip of the branch in her hand to tap a few times nimbly. Lin Xiao looked at her in confusion for a while, and then realized that she still couldn't remember when she had asked her to call her mother. "Alright then, call me whatever you want. By the way, can I let Junjun in now? I feel like she's about to level up. She should awaken her ability." The tip of little man's branch nodded again, responding to her, Okay, Mama, send her in." She still had a lot of energy, but she couldn't stuff too much into Mama's body. Lin Xiao stood up and released the vine before disappearing in a flash. After coming out of the room, she looked at the sky outside the window and found that it was already night. Qiu Lily and Junjun, who had been waiting for her in the room, looked at her the moment she came out. Qiu Lily ran to her and circled around Lin Xiao. She looked her up and down from head to toe. Ayayaya. Ayayaya, you haven't changed your appearance? I thought you'd grow your hair. Lin Xiao raised her hand and touched her still bald head, sighed and said, well, my hair hasn't grown. But my voice has recovered. She finished her sentence smoothly without a pause, although her voice was still hoarse and not pleasant to hear. Qiu Lily and Junjun both looked at her in surprise. Junjun had been silent all the time, just watching silently and writing whatever she wanted to say. Only Qiu Lily liked to say non-stop, although the others couldn't understand. Lin Xiao looked at Junjun and said, okay, are you ready now? Junjun looked at Tong Tong, who had fallen asleep on the bed next to her, and then nodded. Lin Xiao also glanced at the little boy who was sleeping soundly, then held Junjun's hand and disappeared together. Qiu Lily walked around in a circle, and then sat back on the sofa next to her board. After entering the space, Lin Xiao shouted to the lake, little man, then a few vines as thick as arms appeared in the lake and danced on the water. Junjun looked at the vines that had become much thicker in surprise, and then turned to look at Lin Xiao helplessly. Junjun, take off your clothes and go down naked. Lin Xiao said as she turned around to get a cup, then walked to the lake to fill a cup of water, and began to drink. While saying that, she pointed to the lake. Junjun looked at her with some embarrassment, then turned her back to Lin Xiao. She began to take off her clothes. Lin Xiao saw that she was really reserved. So after drinking the water, she took the cup and walked to the strawberry field. Don't worry, I won't look. Besides, I'm also a woman. What's there to be embarrassed about? Junjun smiled awkwardly, and her action of taking off her clothes became more natural. But she didn't know that even if Lin Xiao didn't look back, if she wanted to, she could see what she was doing. Lin Xiao picked strawberries and put them into the cup. The cup wasn't big. After filling 2 or 3 strawberries, it couldn't hold them. She held the cup with one hand and picked 3 strawberries with the other. When she turned around, Junjun and little man had disappeared from the lakeside and the surface of the lake. But she could feel Junjun's existence at the bottom of the lake. Junjun had been dragged to the bottom of the lake by countless vines, and her entire body was wrapped tightly. A tingling feeling came from all over her skin. Something seemed to have entered her body. Junjun didn't know what it was, because she gradually felt a swelling pain in her head. The headache made her lose her sense of her body, and then her mind suddenly became more and more confused. But gradually, some messy images slowly appeared in her mind. At first, there were many people, and everyone seemed to be moving in a certain direction. The surrounding environment was always changing, and the number of people was also changing. In the end, everyone seemed to be very nervous, and they were about to break down. There was no water, no food, no weapons. So a few of their leaders planned to quietly reduce the number of people moving forward. In the end, she and her child were left behind. In order to protect her child from being hurt by the zombie-turned teammates, she and another man desperately ran away with their child. But in the end, she was accidentally bitten. Then that man, in the end, took away the food and water she left for her son. Then while she was unconscious, he quietly left her and her child and left. The pictures in her mind were not coherent, but they were very clear. And seeing these pictures, she slowly remembered a lot of things. Cheng Wangxue was right. She and her son were indeed abandoned by that man. A strong hatred spread in her heart. Chapter 234. Lin Xiao stood by the lake and felt the changes at the bottom of the lake. She found that the energy in the lake rushed to the center of the lake, and then new energy rushed out and rushed to the center of the lake. It went back and forth like this. She turned around and walked to the strawberry field. She saw weeds in the strawberry field and squatted down to pull them up. She didn't know how long it would take for Junjun to recover, so she took the time to tidy up the strawberry and vegetable fields. Junjun had been tidying them up before, but now that she hadn't done it for a few days, a lot of weeds had grown. After pulling the weeds for a while, she saw that there was still no change under Junjun. Lin Xiao flashed out of the space. As soon as she came out, she saw Qiu Lily squatting by Tong Tong's bed. Her arms were folded on the edge of the bed, and she was holding her chin and staring at Tong Tong's sleeping face. When she saw Lin Xiao come out, she immediately turned around and stood up. Aya, you're out? Where's Junjun? Lin Xiao made a shush gesture and then said softly, keep your voice down, don't wake him up. If he doesn't see his mother, he will cry. Qiu Lily looked at Tong Tong with some fear and found that he didn't show any signs of waking up. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. When this little guy cried, the ceiling was going to fall. The two went to the sofa and sat down. Lin Xiao said softly, Junjun's condition isn't good yet, and I don't know how long it will take. Let's wait and hope he can come out before dawn. Otherwise, who will watch over him tomorrow? Qiu Lily said softly, Aya, please hurry up. Qiu Lily said a few words with a bit of a prayer. She suddenly thought of what Lin Xiao said when he came back today and asked her, Aya, by the way, was the zombie you told me to kill today also a level 6 zombie like me? What type was it? What did it look like? Was it ugly? Lin Xiao thought of the girl zombie's appearance. It wasn't that ugly. At least in the zombie world it was pretty. She said, it was a zombie that looked about your age. It wasn't too ugly, but half of its face was covered with scales. Furthermore, she seemed to have retained some of her human instincts. It was just that her personality was strange, sometimes happy and sometimes angry. Actually, I don't think she's a bad person, but she's a little headstrong. When you fight with her, just don't kill her. Just make her run away. When Qiu Lily heard this, she looked at her strangely and asked, about my age? What do you mean she's not bad? Should I hit her or not? Lin Xiao smiled and said, I think you should teach her a lesson and let her know that there are some things she shouldn't do. But I don't know what her ability is, but she can be invisible like me. I wonder which one of you is stronger. Qiu Lily looked at her curiously. She was curious about the zombie that was the same size as her. Does she still have her memories just like me? Or had she never killed anyone? Lin Xiao thought about the young female corpse's behavior and said, although I've never seen her kill anyone, she does like to do bad things. However, she seemed to like children very much, although it felt like she wouldn't hurt them. But it's not right to take a child without the consent of the parents. Qiu Lily looked at her in surprise. Snatch their child? Was she a human trafficker? Lin Xiao looked at her with a smile and said, maybe. But the motive is a bit childish, haha. At the bottom of the spatial lake, Junjun was in excruciating pain. The pain in her body and the pain in her memory made her want to scream. But her mouth and face were covered by a layer of soft stuff, so she couldn't make a sound even if she opened her mouth wide. Huang Tianfei, you bastard. I won't let you off. You bastard. Cruel and unscrupulous thing. But she roared in her heart. That man had abandoned her and her son. She could forgive him for abandoning her. But he actually left Tong Tong behind, and even took away their last food and water. Unforgivable. A large number of memory fragments began to interweave in her mind, forming a complete memory. She remembered that they had escaped from Pluto's base. Huang Tianfei and a few other rank 5 metahumans brought their family members and quietly headed towards Ocean City. She didn't know if those rank 5 metahumans had heard some news and realized that Pluto's base was about to be attacked. So they gathered a group of people and quietly left. Junjun didn't know what was going on at the time. She only saw Huang Tianfei hurry back and pack up his things. Then he pulled the mother and son out. She didn't say what was going on, but she was brought out of the base in a daze. Now that she thought about what Lin Xiao had said, it turned out that Huang Tianfei already knew. That's right, Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao. The leader of Earthly Flame. Suddenly, Junjun thought of something, but before she could continue thinking about it, a wave of energy exploded in her mind. Suddenly, a surge of energy exploded in her mind. It was as if a bomb had exploded in her mind, directly shattering all the memories she had before. Then the energy began to inflate like a balloon in her mind, as if it would not stop until her head exploded. Unable to bear the pain, Junjun couldn't help but scream crazily in her heart. The energy became bigger and bigger. Junjun felt that her head was almost as big as a basketball court. The energy suddenly shrunk back into the center of her mind. Only then did Junjun's body relax. She wanted to take a deep breath. But her mouth and nose were covered, so she couldn't do that. At this moment, the energy slowly condensed in the center of her mind. Then, a small amount of energy was separated and began to flow down her neck into her lower body. Not long after, Lin Xiao was talking to Cho Lily about the zombie girl when her mind suddenly moved. Junjun seems to be fine, I'll go in and take a look. Saying that, she turned around and disappeared into the space. Standing on the shore, Lin Xiao noticed that the water level was rising. Where did the water come from? She had always been curious as to why there was a lake and water in this space. Where did the water come from? Now that the water seemed to be increasing, she didn't know where the water source was. At this time there was a slight wave on the surface of the lake, and a ball of water appeared in the center. Then it slowly sank down, and then a person's head popped out of the water. Then the person swam towards the shore where Lin Xiao was. Chapter 235. Lin Xiao waited for her to get out of the water and then picked up her clothes. She gave them to her as she walked to her. How is it? Your ability? Lin Xiao could feel the level of Junjun's ability. She was now a level 4 zombie. But at the same time, she could feel Junjun's complicated emotions. There was hatred, anger, disappointment, shock, doubt, and disbelief mixed together. What was going on? Lin Xiao looked at her in confusion. Junjun lowered her head, took the clothes and put them on. After putting them on, she raised her head slightly and looked at Lin Xiao with a complicated look. Then she opened her mouth and said, "Leader." Lin Xiao looked at her with a blank face. Then she opened her eyes in surprise. "You can talk? That's too fast. Wait, what did you call me just now?" She looked at Junjun's face. The dark circles under her eyes had disappeared. Only the pair of originally gray eyes had now turned completely black. Her pupils couldn't be seen in the middle of her eyes. Junjun put her wet hair to one side and wrung it dry while saying, "Well, it feels like a long time has passed. I remembered the past about myself and about you." She turned to look at Lin Xiao when she said the last two words. Lin Xiao looked at her with a confused face. "Huh? Do you know me? But first, why did you call me leader? Did you really think I was that Lin Xiao?" Junjun continued wringing the water out of her hair and said, "Leader, since you went to save Lin Feng and his wife, that means you are not someone else. Are you like me, amnesia? Or did you forget the memories of the 5 years after the apocalypse?" Lin Xiao was stunned. She suddenly felt that Junjun's words seemed to have touched something in her mind. A slight pain came from the depths of her mind. Ugh, she raised her hand to cover her forehead, frowned and groaned. Junjun was shocked and looked at her nervously and asked, "What's wrong? Did you remember something?" Lin Xiao covered her forehead and shook her head at her. "No, it's just a little headache." Junjun slightly breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's good that you're fine. Your headache should be normal. You're no longer in your original body. You've changed your body. Maybe something is sealed." Lin Xiao looked up at her and asked, "How did you determine that I was the leader of the death fire? I don't remember when I was a leader." As she spoke, she walked to Cho Lily's wardrobe and found a dry towel for her. Junjun took it, thanked him and said, "Because I think you are her. You are Lin Xiao, aren't you? You've only lost part of your memories just like me." Lin Xiao looked at her without saying a word. After thinking about it, he decided that he still needed to figure out his own affairs. However, Junjun's explanation was very logical. There was nothing wrong with it. She nodded and said, "Maybe you're right. But my memory only goes back to before the doomsday. I thought I died before the doomsday and only woke up now because of Lu Tianyu's body." Junjun said with a smile, "Then your leap in 5 years is too big. It doesn't make sense." Lin Xiao sighed and said in agreement, "Yes, that's why I've always felt strange here. Alright, let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you first. Your aura was very negative just now. Did you remember something?" Speaking of this, Junjun's face immediately became gloomy. She said, "My original name is Lu Jun Tong. Tong's nickname is Tong Tong. And his real name is Huang Yue Tong. Tong Tong is already 4 years old. And my original husband, Huang Tianfei, we used to live a good life in Hades base. But 2 months ago, Huang Tianfei suddenly returned home one day, and hurriedly took us and a group of people out of the base and headed in the direction of High City." As she spoke, Lu Jun's aura became unstable again. Waves of hatred and killing intent overflowed. But the road was too far and there were many zombies on the road. We encountered several level 5 zombie leaders, and most of the people died under the claws of the zombies. In order to protect us ordinary people and young children, those ability users gradually felt that we were burdens. Later on, many of us ordinary people were pushed out by them in times of crisis. If we weren't blocking the zombies, we were used as bait. Speaking up to here, Lu Jun slowly squatted on the ground. Lin Xiao could feel the sorrow and regret in her hatred. Lu Jun continued to say, "We were the last to be abandoned. I begged Huang Tianfei not to abandon us mother and son. At the very least, he had to bring Tong Tong safely to High City. But he didn't. Not only did he heartlessly abandon us, he also took away the last food I left for Tong Tong." Lin Xiao asked curiously, "Then how did you get bitten by zombies and hide in the building?" Lu Jun said, "I was pushed out by Huang Tianfei to block the zombies. After being bitten, Huang Tianfei locked me in a room. I was unconscious for a few days, and when I woke up, Huang Tianfei and the others had already left. But they didn't take Tong Tong away. I found Tong Tong in another room." Lin Xiao sighed. This man really didn't know what to say. In times of crisis, feelings and bloodlines were all fake. He's willing to do anything to stay alive. At this time, Lu Jun murmured, "I can't forgive him for abandoning Tong Tong. I can't forgive him." The original sorrow immediately turned into hatred. Lin Xiao patted her shoulder and said, "Well, you see, Tong Tong is fine now. Let it go. If it wasn't for your arrival, Tong Tong would have been long gone." Lu Jun raised her head and looked at him. Her pair of black eyes didn't show any emotion. But Lin Xiao still sensed that she was very grateful to him, very sincerely grateful. Lin Xiao said, "Well, let's go. I was worried that you wouldn't be able to recover. I was afraid that when Tong Tong woke up, you wouldn't be able to control him. The two of us would be miserable." Lu Jun nodded and stood up. Lin Xiao pulled her, and the two of them flashed out of the space. Outside, Qiu Lily, who was leaning against the window, was looking at the dark sky outside. When she felt the two of them coming out, she immediately turned her head and looked at Junjun. "Ayaya, how was it? How was it?" She flashed and immediately came to Lu Jun's side. Then he walked around her in a circle. She looked at her carefully. She found that apart from her appearance, Junjun's eyes and temperament had changed. Although it didn't feel like she had directly become another person, it was indeed different. And her level had also increased a lot. Lu Jun walked to Tong Tong, bent down to touch her son's hair, and then lowered her head to kiss him on the forehead. She said softly, "It's great to meet the leader." Chapter 236. Ayaya Junjun, you can speak. So fast. I want it too, I want it too. Hearing that Lu Jun could suddenly speak, Qiu Lily immediately became excited. She turned her head and shouted at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao smiled and said, "I have to ask Man about this first. I don't know if she has used up all her energy." At this time, Lu Jun suddenly asked curiously, "Leader, did your space just come into existence? I don't think I've heard that you have space ability before. Also, at the bottom of the lake, what is that?" Lin Xiao felt weird being called like that, so she said, "Hey, don't call me like that. Other people will think it's weird." Lu Jun was stunned and asked, Then what should I call you? I feel like your name is a little weird." Qiu Lily was a bit confused by their conversation. She looked at the two of them strangely. She asked, "Ayaya, what are you guys talking about?" Lin Xiao said to her, "Well, Junjun remembered a lot of things. It's hard to explain it to you now, but you'll know in the future." Then she held her chin and thought for a moment, then said, "How about you guys call me Captain from now on? I'm also leading a zombie squad now." Lu Jun felt that it was right and nodded, "That's about right. Captain is captain." Qiu Lily looked at her. "Ayaya, why are you the captain?" Lin Xiao smiled and looked at her. "How about you be the captain? If there's anything in the future, I'll ask you to solve it." Qiu Lily frowned and thought for a while when she heard that he wanted her to solve every problem. Then she shook her head. She didn't know how to solve a lot of things, so she didn't know how to solve it. Lin Xiao knew that she was too lazy to take care of things. She knew it just by looking at her disappearing figure. She said, "I'll go ask Man if she can repair another one. You guys wait." Then she turned around and entered the space. Standing by the lake, she shouted, Man, come out for a moment. A few vines came out of the water and swam towards Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao squatted by the water and stretched out one hand, letting the vines wrap around it. Man, have you used up all your energy? Can you repair the others? And that depends on how big the restoration is. What that big sister needed to restore just now was the energy in her brain, as well as her memories, so it took a bit more energy. Little Man doesn't have much energy to restore now, Lin Xiao nodded. She had also guessed that was about it. He said, Alright, then you've used up all your energy. Will you be alright? Several thick vines of Little Vine were still swaying randomly in the water by the lakeside. La, Little Man is fine. Little Man has no use for this energy. Lin Xiao suddenly thought of something and asked, Little Man, how did you restore Junjun's memory? Do you think I'm missing a memory? As soon as she finished asking, she heard Little Man's natural answer. That's right, Mama. You've already lost some of your memories, Mama. Don't you know? But Little Man couldn't help Mama recover. Lin Xiao asked her strangely, How do you know? Little Man also replied very blankly. Little Man also doesn't know, but there's a part of Mama's head wrapped up. Little Man can't untie it. A part of her brain was wrapped up? What was wrapped up? Was it because of this that she lost 5 years of memory? But she had already changed her body. Did she bring this situation over? Or was it caused by Lu Qianyu's identity? Lin Xiao asked. Then if I untie this part of my brain, will I remember? Little Man tapped the tip of the vine, and the 2 small leaves trembled. Little Man thinks so, but she doesn't know if it's true. Mama will find a way to try it. Lin Xiao scratched her chin with her other hand, thought and said, How should I try? If I lose my memory, even you can't cure it. Little Man seemed to be thinking about this problem, but she obviously couldn't figure it out. Mama, why don't you ask someone else? Lin Xiao sighed and had no choice but to respond. Okay then. Thank you, Little Man. Little Man said reluctantly. Mama, don't say thank you to Little Man, it's so strange. Lin Xiao nodded and said, Okay, that's it for now. I'll go out and ask if there's any way to help. Lin Xiao went out in a flash and went into the room. Lu Jun immediately turned around and asked, How is it? Qiu Lily also leaned against Lin Xiao and looked at her expectantly. Lin Xiao said to Qiu Lily helplessly, No, Little Man said there's not enough energy, so I can only do it next time. Don't worry. Qiu Lily pouted her lips in disappointment and replied, Aya, okay. Lin Xiao crooked her hand at the 2 of them and said, Come, Little Man said that there might be a part of my brain wrapped up by something. Maybe it's because of this that I lost my memory. Come and think about it, is there any way to restore my memory? Lu Jun looked at her strangely. In your head? Is it this head of Lu Tianyu? Or is it in the head of your soul? Lin Xiao shook her head blankly and said, I don't know either. Lu Jun said, By the way, your special ability used to be of the fire attribute. How did it turn into smoke now? Thinking of her special ability, Lin Xiao suddenly became curious about what her special ability was like in the past. It sounded like a black poisonous fire. She asked, By the way, can you tell me about my previous special ability? Lu Jun stood next to her and said with her chin in her hands, Your special ability flame used to be black. That's why everyone called you Death Flame. Its nature is to melt, or rather devour. Anyway, as soon as your fire comes out, all matter within 3 meters of you will disappear. If you weren't facing 5 level 7 special ability users at the same time, how could you have lost? Lin Xiao thoughtfully thought about the flame described by Lu Jun, and felt as if she had lost something. Lu Jun said, You are very strong, don't doubt it. I think if you go to that place you might find something. Lin Xiao asked her in confusion, Where? Lu Jun said, It's the place where you died. The place where she died. She didn't even remember how she died. Her last memory was the night when she was sick before the doomsday. But on second thought, she knew that Lu Jun was talking about the place where she died after being besieged by 5 level 7 special ability users. But not many people knew that location. It seemed that she still needed to investigate it. She nodded and said, I was going to investigate this matter as well, but I didn't expect to find out about it. But I had this guess before, but I wasn't sure. Now that you are by my side, my thoughts are much clearer. Lu Jun nodded. Lin Xiao said, well, although we don't need to sleep, let's go rest for a while. Tomorrow we'll talk to them about moving. Chapter 237. The next day, Lin Xiao brought Xiedong to Lin Feng's room. The door was open and Lin Feng was holding Lin Xiaolu and reading some books. Lin Xiao stood at the door and knocked. The other people in the room turned their heads and saw a bald man in camouflage standing at the door. Ah, you're here. Please come in. Lin Feng put Lin Xiaolu down and pointed to another room outside the door. He said to her, Xiaolu, go play with your aunt. Lin Xiaolu nodded, okay. Then she hopped towards the door and stared at Lin Xiao's head when she got close to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao smiled at her and walked in with Xiedong after she went out. Lin Feng pointed at the empty sofa and smiled. Please sit. I didn't expect you to come back earlier than Tianxing. I thought he would come back first. Lin Xiao nodded and sat down. Then she asked, he didn't come back because he didn't find the person. Lin Feng was stunned and looked at her in shock. Huh? You can speak normally? If I didn't see your eyes, I wouldn't believe you are a zombie. That's incredible. Then he stared at Lin Xiao and looked at her. He was thinking, isn't this zombie's evolution a bit too fast? What level is she at? Is she above level 6? But her eyes are still black. No, there's a green tint now. Lin Feng looked at Lin Xiao's eyes and suddenly found a light green circle as big as an eye. It seemed to have the effect of cosmetic contact lenses. But the color was very light, so you couldn't see it if you didn't look carefully. Lin Feng couldn't be blamed for doubting Lin Xiao's level, because Lin Xiao seemed to be the leader among Chou Lily and the others. That way she wouldn't be too weak. But she couldn't speak normally before, but now she could speak fluently. This kind of growth was too shocking. Lin Xiao smiled and said, I'm not an ordinary zombie. Okay, let's talk business. Then she took out a few maps from the space and spread them on the table. She pointed at the Upper City, Lower City, and West Lake area. I found these maps from the Planning Bureau, and found that there are still many resources in these central areas that have not been collected. The Upper City and Lower City were densely populated, so there were too many zombies. Furthermore, there were signs of the city being sealed. I reckon that not many of the people inside were able to escape. Lin Feng lowered his head and looked at where she was pointing. Lin Xiao continued, I have checked most of the bustling areas. There are a lot of zombies. But there aren't many signs of battle, so if you're willing, we can clear out a vacuum zone here and slowly expand it later. There are a lot of mutated plants in the West Lake district, so we can use them. Lin Feng thought about it and asked, I have a question that I haven't asked you before. Although you said that you could gather the zombies together to form a wall so that people from the outside would have to pass through it first. But have you ever thought that if our own people want to go in and out, you guys, even if a few zombies want to send us in and out, you guys don't seem to have enough manpower. The only one who is effective against these ordinary zombies is you, the little sister in the white dress. Lin Xiao nodded and said, yes, her name is Chou Lily. You guys also know that she is a king. Other than her, I can only control ordinary zombies. But now that Junjun has also advanced, she can also play a small role. But from what you said, we really don't have enough manpower. You have reminded me that I still need to recruit new members. In fact, Lin Xiao had already thought of this problem before, but she just didn't say it. But since Lin Feng brought it up now, she might as well say her plan. Lin Xiao had this idea when she saw the girl zombie who snatched Xiao Budian in the West Lake district. But that child looked a bit wild and had a strange personality. If she wanted to subdue her, she had to understand what she was thinking. So she wanted Chou Lily to get in touch with the girl zombie with snake-like eyes. Lin Feng looked at her with some suspicion and said, you want to subdue all the zombies at the king level, right? Are you sure? Why did he feel that in her eyes zombie kings were not dangerous at all? Well, okay, think about it from another angle. They really weren't dangerous to her. Lin Xiao smiled faintly and said, don't worry, I will control them. With me here, I won't let them hurt anyone. I won't let anyone or zombies hurt you. Although Lin Feng didn't agree with her idea, he also knew that he didn't have the right to interfere. He said, all right then, your team has the right to decide. But I hope you can do a good job of keeping a safe distance from us. If one of your zombies bites one of our people, you will be killed immediately. If one of your zombies bites our people, it won't be good for us. Lin Xiao nodded and said, don't worry. If there are zombies that have lost their minds and eat people, I will deal with them first. Lin Feng thought about it and said to her, I suggest that when you implement this idea, it's better not to let others know. Lin Xiao smiled faintly and said to him, thank you. Lin Feng pointed to the upper city and said, then let's go to the upper city, but we have to wait for Yuan Tianxing and the others to come back first. After that, we still need a lot of manpower, technicians and so on. Just the solar energy alone, we don't have anyone here who knows how to install it. If we dismantle it, we can guarantee that it won't break. Lin Xiao rubbed his chin and said, Yuan Tianxing should be able to think of this. Apart from the few people you are looking for, he might not be able to find them. Other than the few people you are looking for, he might even bring other outsiders. Lin Feng was stunned and thought about it. With Yuan Tianxing's personality, he would indeed consider this. How do you know he will think of this? We didn't discuss it at the time. Lin Xiao looked at him and said, isn't he one of the deputy leaders of Pluto Base? If he can't even think of this, how did he become the deputy leader? Lin Feng was speechless. Okay, he had nothing to say. The two of them discussed the planned location, and Lin Xiao made a lot of reports on the situation of the location. Then they decided to wait for Yuan Tianxing to come back before making a decision. At this time, Yuan Tianxing and the others in the base were a little depressed. They had heard that Li Zheng and the others were no longer in the base. They seemed to have gone out with a small armed team for some unknown mission. And Li Zheng and the others all went out with them. No one was left in the base. Yuan Tianxing was very puzzled. Where did these people go? But soon he made another decision. Since Li Zheng and the others were not there, he could only bring the others back first. He had to find some people with skills first.